On specific items, any member of the public may speak about an item that is on the agenda. So if you wish to address the commission in either of those opportunities, please complete a speaker card located in the back of the seats, turn them into staff, and please print your name clearly so I can try to make it out. When you speak, I ask that you come up to the podium and adjust the microphone so that you're speaking directly into it. And please state your name and address for the record. And in fairness to all that wish to speak, we request that you limit your time to 3 minutes. So the first part of the agenda is verbal communications, and members of the public are invited to speak about something that's not on the agenda. And I have a card here from Dr. Weissman. And if anyone else wishes, please submit one.
I would like to make an interesting comparison. For the April 10th Planning Commission meeting on fences, your packets contained our community communication that was submitted on April 5th and was written without the benefit of seeing the staff report. You then received our addendum on Monday, April 8th, written after we saw the staff report. Contrast that to the hearing tonight. Fences were originally scheduled to be heard on May 8th, but staff and the commission were kind enough to delay that hearing for 2 weeks because 2 of us couldn't attend the May 8th meeting. But with this change of schedule, we were able to see the staff report a full 2 weeks before our written communication was due, which gave us adequate time to write a more relevant letter to be included in your packet. Seeing how this process worked and the benefits associated with it from a community member's perspective, I propose that this time schedule will become the normal. Let's have staff post their reports online far enough in advance so that those of us who are interested have time to respond to staff's report and make relevant contributions which could still be included in your packet. This would allow you the entire weekend to deal with this material. Last-minute addendums and desk items would become less common, if not obsolete. Staff would have to rearrange their schedule a little bit, but their overall workload should be decreased since they wouldn't have to deal with an influx of last-minute communications. Under this schedule, everyone would benefit, including the commission. Most of all, the democratic process would benefit and no party would gain an unfair advantage. I would also like to point out that tonight will be the 3rd discussion on fences after the public part of the hearing was closed. Please don't misunderstand me. I do appreciate the efforts and open discussion that is occurring, and I do think that a better document is emerging. But I also think that this format deprives the commission of the benefit of public discourse and discussion. I do appreciate how difficult it is to sit in your seats. I wish that I could do better when you ask me questions. But to limit the active public input is to limit the exchange of new ideas. I see nothing wrong with us trying to do something bold here. We may not get it perfect the first time, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. We actually suspect that this fence ordinance will not affect that many property owners, and that built-in exceptions will protect those that are. But we also recommend that in 2 years, this issue be scheduled to come back before the commission to see how things are working.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you for your comments. We appreciate all input about process, particularly if it improves the democratic process. And by the way, I do intend to open the hearing for comments on item 3, I believe it is, 4. So we'll now move to the consent calendar. And the consent calendar consists of items that are approved in one motion, and of course any member of the public or the commission can remove an item or ask that an item be removed before the hearing. So the only item we have, the one item, is approval of the minutes, May 8, 2019. Do we have a motion? Yes, Commissioner Badami.
I don't have a motion, but I'd like to pull the item.
Okay.
All right. So I have a question for staff. And typically the minutes include a public record of a deciding body's votes and motion. And I don't see that on here. And I didn't have time to go back and review the tapes. So for consent items number 1, 2, and 3 from the minutes of May 8th, there's no public record of the deciding body's decision. So is it appropriate for us tonight to approve the minutes without this information, or should we continue it, or make it contingent upon the record being updated?
Which item are you concerned about? I'm sorry.
Okay, so the consent items from May 8th, item number 1, 2, and 3, I believe they were approved unanimously. I can't remember who made the motions. I actually think it was Commissioner O'Donnell, but I can't be
You
certain.
can approve those and with the direction to staff to go back and put in exactly, because you're right, it doesn't say what happened with those consent items. So thank you for catching that. And you can approve it with direction to staff to include the outcome of the consent item motion.
Okay, so with that, then I move to approve consent item number 1, approval of the minutes from May 8th, with the direction to staff to update the record with the vote and motions made by the commissioners.
Okay, do we have a second? Yes, Commissioner Janoff?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Okay,
Aye.
passes unanimously. I'm sure we'll note that one too. Thank you. Okay, so now we will move on to the public portion of our hearing, and the first item there is agenda item number 2, which is 16548 Ferris Avenue, conditional use permit application U19003, requesting approval of a modification to an existing conditional use permit for an increase in student enrollment in a nursery school, Mariposa Montessori School, on property zoned R18, APN 53207-127. Property owner, Faith Lutheran Church. Applicant, Hillary Ziegelboim. And project planner, Sean Mullen. May I have a show of hands from commissioners who visited the property? Okay, thank you. Any disclosures? Okay. Mr. Mullen, I understand you'll be giving the staff report.
Thank you, Chair Hughes. The request before you tonight is to increase enrollment at an existing nursery school from 50 students to 70 students. The applicant has provided a project description and letter of justification for the request. The original CUP for the church was approved by the town in 2000. A modification to that CUP was approved in 2005 that resulted in a slight change in the hours of the AM and PM classes. The request before you tonight is limited to a change in the maximum number of students allowed, as previously mentioned, from 50 to 70 students. Hours of operation and other operational characteristics would remain the same. In addition to the applicant's request, staff has identified many conditions in the existing CUP that have been completed and are no longer applicable, and recommends that they be modified or eliminated to simplify the CUP moving forward. Based on the analysis provided in the staff report, staff recommends approval of the request, subject to the conditions included in Exhibit 3. This concludes staff's presentation of the report, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes, Vice Chair Hansen.
I had a question about noise. So there was some input from the public, which I'm sure we'll hear more about noise. And my question for staff is, I believe while it's not specified as such in the CUP, they would be subject to our noise ordinance and have been since we've had it in place. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you. I had a question. In some of the correspondence, there were questions about the traffic mitigation fee and some requests about that I saw. Is that matter before the Planning Commission tonight?
That matter is not before the Planning Commission tonight. The project did trigger the traffic impact fee by the town's traffic impact policy, but the applicant made a request for a waiver to the council, and the council approved that request.
Okay, so that's already settled.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we will move to the applicant and open the public portion of the hearing, and the applicant has 10 minutes to address the commission. And just please state your name and address.
Good evening. I'm Hillary Ziegelboim. I live at 334 Los Gatos Boulevard, and I'm the president of the board of directors at Mariposa Montessori School. My position on the board is voluntary, and I have no financial incentive to expand the school. I don't make money there. It's completely volunteer. Mariposa is a nonprofit school located on the Faith Lutheran Church and is applying to amend the CUP to expand by 20 students. We have full support from the property owner, and in fact, Bob and Gwenny Balcom, who are the managers of the church, had hoped to be here tonight in support of our change, but a scheduled international trip was in conflict. In recent months, 3 different Los Gatos schools announced closure by the end of this year. One of these, Green Hills Preschool, has been operating in town for over 50 years, and its closure alone impacts 100 students. Harker Preschool also announced that it will not reopen, and Harwood Hills Country School closed its doors earlier this year, giving families just a few days' notice to look for enrollment elsewhere. As a result of the closures, Mariposa now has an extensive waiting list, most of whom are Los Gatos residents, hoping to attend. The anxiety and uncertainty expressed by these parents prompted us to apply for this expansion. With an existing vacant classroom to utilize and a parking lot with ample space, Mariposa can help with this urgent community need as soon as the upcoming school year. Many alternative preschools in Los Gatos are either cooperative or religiously affiliated. For the families who have dual working parents and require a quality option with flexible hours, co-ops are not realistic. Likewise, many families prefer a secular preschool rather than one with a religious affiliation, especially if that affiliation differs from the family's own beliefs. To foster and maintain a healthy, vibrant, and diverse citizenry, communities must provide secular preschool options, and Mariposa is uniquely poised to offer such services as it attracts a global and diverse student body and has no religious affiliation. I was going to say some other things about the general plan, but it's in the summary report that you received from Sean. I know that some of the neighbors have expressed concern, so I want to let some of the other board members specifically address noise and traffic. But on a personal note, my husband and I moved here 5 years ago to raise our boys in a community with exceptional public schools. A quality education begins in preschool. To maintain Los Gatos' reputation as a desirable community with first-rate educational opportunities, the availability of quality early childhood education must keep pace with town growth.
Good evening. My name is Kirsten Dawson. I too serve on the board of directors and am not financially incentivized to be here. My 2 daughters are currently enrolled at Mariposa. We're fortunate enough, as Hillary said, to be in a position where we have an already available room on our campus to allow for just 20 of the students that are on waiting lists to enroll this fall. It won't come anywhere close to serving all the children and their families who anxiously remain on our list and others, but we feel it's our duty as members and as an integral organization within the Los Gatos community to welcome some of these new students into our school community. However, we understand the concern from neighborhood residents with regard to the potential impact there may be on local traffic and the safety of pedestrians in the immediate area. As is the Montessori model to embrace the core principle of respect for others and the environment, we seek and strive to have an amicable and respectful relationship with our neighbors. Because of this, I would like to share some of the steps we've taken over the last years and some of the plans that we would like to include for the upcoming expansion. First is our school hours have and will remain to be scheduled from 9:02 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. in order to not conflict with local elementary, middle, and high school hours that start at 8 o'clock. Morning drop-off at Mariposa occurs from 9:02 to 9:15, and though we provide a car drop-off line for families, several opt to park their car in our lot and either commute by bike, scooter, walking stroller, and walk their children into the classroom. Because of this, those who park cannot leave the school prior to 9:15. So if you think about it, there's approximately 1 car that leaves our parking lot every minute. We would like to recognize that there are a number of families currently enrolled that drop off more than 1 child, and we expect there to be approximately 6 families in the fall outside of carpooling that will be dropping off more than one of their own children. Presently, Green Hills also starts their day at 9 a.m., with 100 students no longer being dropped off just 5 blocks away, and 20 students joining Mariposa. That's still an 80% reduction in local student traffic. To help mitigate concerns from neighbors about an increase in traffic, Mariposa can implement increased communication with our parent community that will emphasize the importance of safety, respect for law and others while driving the surrounding streets, and will encourage them to take steps to minimize our daily traffic patterns in the neighborhood, including carpool rideshare, walk, roll, or bike, as some and many of the students live nearby and already commute in this fashion. We'd also like to participate in the Town of Los Gatos Safe Route to Schools, and we'll collaborate with our community on agreed upon preferred routes. We can post these suggestions and more on the school website. And finally, I'd like to share that we seek to be embraced by our neighbors and community, and we certainly continue to welcome them into our school, our campus, and we'll do everything we can to have an amicable coexistence with them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Heather Gibson. I reside at 14850 Las Flores Lane in Los Gatos. I also serve on the board of directors at Mariposa and have no financial incentive on at all. I want to just take a few minutes to address the noise concerns of our neighbors on Potter Court. I'll walk with this or come closer if you need to see, but the area where we're proposing to add the students is in room 13.
Would you mind to take the mic out of the stand? It's fine. You can go over there and point, but let's just, yeah, that would be great also.
Okay. Is it okay if we put that there? Thank you. The area where we propose to add the new students is in room 13, which abuts the fence line shared with these 3 homes. We've been in communication with those homes, and we just want to kind of alleviate their concerns and give them a picture of what the school area will look like so that they hopefully don't feel that the noise will be as much of an impact on their life. We certainly don't want to impact our neighbors in a negative way. We want to have a harmonious relationship with them. We want them to enjoy their yard, but we would also like to be able to utilize the property that we're renting. This is room 13. These 3 houses that we've spoken with this individual, and seen email from this individual. This home shares approximately 10 feet of a fence line directly opposite room 13. That would be right here. There happens to be a gap in the foliage along that fence line, and the homeowner has shared that they have concerns that their second floor window is visible to the classroom. So we would like to mitigate that by planting a tall tree there so that it provides a natural screen. The second home here shares the longest portion of the fence line in relation to room 13. I want to state that the distance from room 13 to the base of this fence is 12 feet. So there's a 12-foot area that we are not renting. Children won't be in that area. No one that related to Mariposa will be in that area. It will serve as a natural noise buffer. This is a 6-foot fence with a hedge above it that will provide a natural noise and visual screen. So the hedge extends to about here. This home then abuts, where do they abut? They abut this fence line. I think the property owner might have a little concern that this is a playground space. We wanted to alleviate that concern by letting them know that it's a garden planting space. The kids are there minimally, and we designed it to be quiet out of consideration. The third home is here, abutting our quiet outdoor space. This has all been in use throughout the 2018 and 2019 school year with no complaints from any neighbors about noise or activity. The third home also faces 2 garden beds and a meditation corner. The remainder of the outdoor back quiet space is this. It's a shaded area with natural stepping blocks made out of tree stumps, a small area where the children sweep or draw, and 1 climbing leaf. We also have a formal playground as opposed to a quiet outdoor area that is located here on the other side of the school and adjacent to a large parking lot. This is the area where the children are able to use the slides. Montessori tends to be a very calm environment. The children aren't typically running around and screaming and yelling, so it is a very quiet sort of school. In addition, room 13, what? Oh, it's the buzzer?
No, that's okay. Just buzz it up.
Room 13 is air conditioned. One of the neighbors was concerned that we would have the windows open when it was hot. So it's air conditioned, we can keep the windows closed.
Thank you. Are there questions? And maybe I could ask you if you would mind to maybe turn one of those chairs around and put that so that the public can see it.
Oh, you want it to face that?
Yeah, that right, maybe right in front of the desk there.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. And I just had one quick question, and that is, Were these materials included in your letter, the photographs and the?
These were in response to the letters, the opposition letters.
Okay.
Not in our original application.
Okay, thank you. That's good. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Badami.
Have you received any noise or traffic complaints from neighbors in the past with your current student enrollment?
I can address that. Historically, complaints have gone through the church because I think residents have known them for a long time. And the only noise complaint that the church informed us of was during one of the public meetings that they hold within our part of the campus during the evenings and on the weekends. So they've never received a noise complaint that they've passed along to us, and we've never received one directly either. And in terms of traffic, we did have a neighbor who complained about a specific driver who he thought was distracted leaving the parking lot, and he followed and took pictures, and it turned out that it wasn't even a parent at the school, it was someone else attending, another function there. So we have received directly a traffic, but that was the one incident that I'm aware.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Janoff?
Yeah, thank you. How quiet is the quiet area, or what happens in the quiet area?
Yeah, so basically, we spoke a little bit to the Montessori philosophy, but it's an orderly and calm area that kids are encouraged to either do gardening in small groups, or they can go sit and have time to themselves. It's not designed to be a playground like our front playground is. That's a very different running and screaming and, kids will do. So it really was designed with the natural scape in mind to be more, they are kids, right? This is 3 to 6-year-old children.
I would say they actually refer to it as the quiet playground.
Right.
A 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So especially my 5-year-old that is finishing up her 2nd year of attendance, they know that when they're back there, it is to be quiet.
So it's not silent. It's quiet.
It's not silent, no, but like Hillary said, the climbing activities, the sliding board, the tunnels, all of that is on the front playground, and that is where they're to go and cut loose.
Thank you.
Could you take the microphone, please? Thank you.
It's worth noting also that the entire student body is not in that back area at the same time. We stagger the outdoor areas the outdoor time by class and split it between the front and the back areas. So there wouldn't be 50 children there all at once. There wouldn't be, 40 children there all at once. So
And
is
even
that
with
how
an
you would characterize it?
expansion, the outdoor area amount we would rotate a 4th time rather than the 3. So there would be no increase in the number of children outdoors at any one time, even with an additional enrollment.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Vice Chair Hansen.
So I wanted to understand, and I saw some concerns from the neighbors as well on this. You've asked for an expansion of 20. Is there more coming? Because you clearly indicated there's at least a very long waiting list. And
Right.
so how did you come up with a number of 20? And is there more that you can foresee in the future? Because
We came up with 20 just because we have a vacant classroom that we can utilize. That doesn't need construction. It doesn't need to be added to. We rent from Faith Lutheran, and so the part of the campus that our classrooms are, that's other than the meetings that they conduct there outside of school hours, it literally sits vacant in the middle of our campus. We don't have other classrooms back there unless we literally took over the church at some point. That's not going to happen. But, we're not pursuing additional enrollment. We just are trying to fill a community need that actually came to us pretty strongly.
Okay, and so the 20, if I understood it correctly, is because it's the limit of the classroom that
Right,
you have available
licensing,
without
the number of
having-
children we can
Absolutely.
put in a single classroom, yeah.
All right, thank you.
I had a question about along the same lines. You indicated that there were 100 children without a preschool
Green Hills,
from
just Green Hills alone.
Okay, I was curious where that number came
Well,
from.
Harker, we've since learned, they're kind of being looser about the closure. It was confirmed that they were closing by someone at the town, but if you call them, they'll say, they're kind of loose about that. So I really don't know, but the number we quoted is just for Green Hills alone, and also because it's 5 blocks from us, it seems a little more relevant in terms of traffic and things like that.
Right. Okay, thank you. You will have another opportunity after the public.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. You can leave it there. That's fine. Okay, so we do have a number of cards, so I'm going to kind of announce 3 at a time, and the first one will be Mary Oriskovic, and then Pat Parsigian, and then Jenny Fountain. So Mary, please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mary Oreskovic, and I'm a resident at 16798 Potter Court. My home is one of the homes that is directly behind room 13. I'm a new resident at Potter Court, and along with my neighbors here, we're opposed to the expansion or the modification because we are concerned. May I?
Yes,
Hard to see my
absolutely.
notes with this in my way. We're concerned about the noise and the visual activity of the additional 20 students and the use of room 13 because of its, like I can see it, it's the close proximity. It sits about, the roof line anyway, sits about 5 feet from our fence line. We recently purchased our property on Potter Court. I've been a resident of Los Gatos for 10 years, but we moved back into town and we chose the court because it's quiet. That was one of our reasons. I spent a lot of time looking at the properties and in town, and that area appealed to us because it was extra quiet. So I am naturally very concerned about the extra noise, not only currently but in the future for further expansions, and what impact that might have on our real estate. I mean, we understand real estate is very expensive in Los Gatos, so that's one of my personal concerns. We're also concerned about the garden expansion in the back that we see on this poster, which is great to have a visual. And again, just the proximity to the fence line and the neighbors. We have that hedge. For some of our other neighbors will speak, but from their perspective, if you go into each backyard, you have a very different perspective. And the thing that is just kind of shocking is how close that room is. And yes, it's quiet because it's not being used, but we don't know how it's going to be when the kids come there. So of course we're naturally concerned about that use. And currently it is being used in the evenings for AA. And although I haven't heard any noise, the light is on. It's not a huge deal, but it's just one of the things I notice in that private space in the backyard. We are concerned about the traffic generated by the 16 or so extra vehicles that might come in per day. We're concerned about future development expansion. I'm new to the neighborhood, but we have some neighbors that have been there for many, many years, and they had previously challenged the school coming in, and I think that they're concerned about that, and I'll let them talk about that. So I urge that this topic be either denied or postponed for further discussion. At the very least, we'd like to understand more how we can work together on a potential expansion and how that might impact us. At this point, it's all very new to us. We learned about this last week, so we don't know. I guess that means I have to stop talking. Is that right?
Thank you. We
Okay,
may
thank
have
you.
some questions, though, if you don't mind. Yes, Vice Chair Hansen.
My question for you is, were you aware when you purchased your property, since you're a relatively new owner, that you were very close to church as well as a preschool?
Yes, I was very aware because my children went to this preschool many years ago.
Okay.
So I was, and knowing how the preschool works, it is very quiet, and I wasn't concerned. So I was good with that, but I just don't know what the additional expansion, how much that will impact us, plus the proximity of the room 13. Those are my main concerns. And then, of course, down the road, what might happen.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Badami.
You mentioned that you hoped that you all would work together. And I think you heard during the testimony that they're offering to plant a tree. Have you reached out? Could that be a conversation between both of you, both parties, in regard a tree planting?
Of course, we've already had a conversation today, so definitely. I'm just trying to follow the protocols of what this meeting is about and whatever decision needs to be made. I don't know how much we will be in, there's a process to everything, and so I'm here to explain my concern right now, and these are further conversations that we can certainly have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up, and I appreciate your letter. It was very thorough and helped to understand the situation. So despite the fact that you have limited time, you provided quite a bit of information. The question that I had was, do you have any other suggestions about, particularly about how to mitigate the noise or the privacy issues that we might consider?
So I don't know, I know there's other rooms there. I just don't know enough about the space. I mean, I know the space from when my kids went there and what was used. This room is just so close. There are some other spaces, but I don't know enough whether they're available. You know, the discussions that I'd like to have is about the fence, about curtains, about all sorts of things, but
Fence and curtains,
curtains
okay.
and curtains and just
An alternate room location.
alternate room location. I mean, because I've been impressed with the playground and the rooms that are being used, because at this point, I'm not home every day in the morning. I work part-time, so I haven't heard any activity, and I've been very pleased with that. And that's one of the reasons why I was okay with buying the property there.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Pat Parsegian, and then Jenny Fountain, followed by Susie Tavana.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Pat Parsegian. I live at 16621 Ferris Avenue, and I purchased my home in 1996, so I was here back in 2000 for the original application and the traffic mitigations and so forth that accompanied that. I'm concerned about this expansion. We've heard about 20 students. They didn't mention, as I see here in Part B, that there will also be an increase of 3 staff. So I don't see how 23, a number of 23, translates into 16 trips. And I will acknowledge the fact that perhaps today some students come, multiple students per car, but we can't guarantee that. So going forward, for those of us who live on Ferris, long after these students are done, year after year, we will have these car trips. I will also note, I would like the Planning Commission to take into account the overall effect on the neighborhood. You may be well aware of the expansion that was granted to the Hillbrook School, I believe, last year, and mitigations around that, including busing. I will note for you that the letter I received here from Mariposa talks about staggered pickup times between 12 and 4 p.m. Depending on when you were there, you might have noticed that around 3:15, a school bus from Hillbrook stops on Kennedy Road and outpour a number of students. Their parents are parked on Ferris. So perhaps there was a great intention to reduce the traffic for Marchmont and for Englewood, and it's simply moved to our neighborhood. So we have on the order of 6 or so minivans and SUVs parking on Ferris, a school bus dropping off all the kids and walking onto our street and getting into these cars. So that's a problem in terms of additional traffic. It's also a safety issue for the kids, and now this increase of traffic at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you for your comments. Regarding the bus that's dropping students off from Hillbrook and the concern you have with the additional cars and kids in your neighborhood, have you reached out to Hillbrook to let them know they're under under guidance from the Planning Commission in their conditions of approval that they need to be responsive to neighborhood issues. So my question is, have you actually contacted Hillbrook to talk about the concern you have?
I have not. I am not normally home in the afternoon. I happened to be home sick last week and noticed this.
Thank you. Okay, next speaker is Jenny Fountain, followed by Susie Tavana, and then Dan Barris.
Hi, I am actually a member of the Mariposa Board also, as well as a parent and a citizen. However, I am moving in the next couple of months, and I want to reserve my time here to allow any current neighbor questions, and so that possibly I can respond to those. So I'd like to reserve my last 3 minutes to the very end.
Okay, I guess we could.
Process. It would not follow our policies and procedures, so
Right.
you're not allowed
Right,
to.
well, I don't even know if this is going to be necessary. So I just wanted to appeal more on a philosophical level. We've looked, you guys can see what we've done here. You can see what we're asking.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Welcome to bring it around to you. I'd be more than happy to do that. You know, I want to have a neighbor who I can reach across the aisle and say, hey, I want to work this out. And that's what I'm asking for you guys to do too. You know, we're not
if you don't mind, you can please address your comments and questions to the commission. That's the procedure here. If you would rather put your time with the applicant, you can be part of the applicant's response. The applicant will have 5 minutes.
Sure, I just want the commission to know that as...
If you're going to be part of the applicant's response, then you'd have to confine your time to that period.
Well, then I will speak as part of the public.
Okay, go ahead.
As
then.
a member of this town of Los Gatos, I've been here 12 years, and I know what kind of neighbors I'd like to have. And I think that we have a chance as neighbors now and as a town to show that we can work together and we can fix whatever grievances we have and we can move forward. As a member of the town, I'm not asking my neighbors to give up any more than I'm willing to give up. I'm not asking to impinge upon their property rights, and I'm not asking them to impinge upon mine. You know, we just want to do what's best for this community. As a community, that's the type of community I want to be in, and I'm hoping that that's the type of community that this council wants and that the rest of the neighbors want. And so, as a community member, I'm asking you here today to join me in making this a better community where we can get together, we can figure out our problems, as opposed to coming down and waiting for somebody else to figure it out for us.
Thank you. Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. So next speaker is Susie Tavana, and then Dan Barris, and then Jean Abrahams.
Okay, and I'll probably hold this just so I'm a little bit more comfortable. My name is Susie Tavana. I am a local homeowner on the Los Gatos Boulevard corridor. I'm a local business owner on the Los Gatos Boulevard corridor. I'm a community volunteer. I volunteer at every single preschool in town, including Little Oak Preschool, Mariposa Montessori Preschool, Green Hills Preschool, Stratford, Growing Footprints, Kitty Campus. I'm personally friends with almost every single preschool director as well. My husband and I spend a lot of time volunteering for this town. We volunteer for the school district, and we are very dedicated to advocating for children. As a mama, which is what I'm actually here for, finding good early childhood care in this town is difficult, it's stressful, and it's a desperate struggle for moms like me whose number one concern is safety. All three of my kids are affected by Green Hills closing. Green Hills, just so you know, is across the street from where Mariposa Montessori is. But besides Green Hills, we're seeing 3 incredible preschools close their doors this year. 3 more small businesses, out of all the small businesses we're seeing, have found it impossible to survive in this town. And there are hundreds of kids that are displaced. I spoke with the director of Harker Preschool, whom I also know, and she verified to me that there would be no more students coming in. It impairs working mothers from having the ability to properly work. And make no mistake, these are not moms who are hanging out in their yoga pants while someone else takes care of their kids. These are people who have to work because living in Los Gatos means living and having dual income. Child care is a weight on your shoulders that only a mother understands. Without child care, families in this town will not make it. When Green Hills closed its doors, I didn't have that moment rush that a lot of other moms had. I struggled because I've put a lot of years into this school. But when I finally came up for air, I contacted every preschool. I contacted Little Oak, and they told me, Susie, we love you, but we've got 30 kids on our wait list. I contacted Growing Footprints, and they were like, we've had over 50 kids show up for our open house today. But I did have a friend who said that she knows of a place right off Loma Alta. It's not permitted, but they'll take me. Is that safe? Are the kids who go to school there safe? High-quality child care should not be out of reach for families in Los Gatos. I feel for families who bought a home next to a church, a gas station, and a liquor store.
Thank
Not
you.
probably what they were hoping for.
Thank you. There may be some questions, so thank you for your comments. Yeah, Vice Chair Hansen.
Thank you for sharing your story. So if I understood it, were all of your children enrolled in Green Hills Preschool?
Yes.
And then at this moment in time, you do or do not have a solution for them going forward after they close their doors?
Similar to the hundreds of other families displaced by these 3 preschools, I am constantly in contact with the preschools in town, hoping for a spot.
But it's not resolved yet?
Well, we're hoping that it is resolved. I am personally hoping to be at Mariposa Montessori in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I had a question. I wasn't quite clear on the location. Where's the Harker Preschool?
Harker Preschool is on Union Avenue.
Okay, is that Los Gatos?
It's 4 doors down from Los Gatos,
Okay.
but the majority of their students are Los Gatos residents, which I again verified today when I spoke with the director.
Right. Well, thank you, and thank you for your comments. Okay. Next speaker is Dan Barris, followed by Jean Abrahams, and then the last card I have is Lori Kirkendall. Sorry.
Thank you very much. My name is Dan Barris. I live at 15821 Poppy Lane. My children, we're a Green Hills family. My oldest son graduated from there and is currently at Dave's Avenue. My second son was going to be enrolled there in the fall, and we got that call that said that they were closing their doors. So similar to what Susie said, there's just this absolute panic that comes over you at that moment. My wife got on the phone and started contacting all of the different preschools in the area, and she was told the same thing. The waiting lists were a mile long. We were fortunate enough to get on the waiting list for Montessori Mariposa, and we're hoping that our child will be enrolled there in the fall. There's just such a need for childcare in this area, and we're just hoping to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Jean Abrahams, followed by Lori Kirkendall. And if anyone else would like to speak, you are welcome to submit a card.
Good evening. My name is Jean Abrahams. I live at 16791 Potter Court. And it's not that I don't like children. I was a teacher for 32 years. But we live on a very small court, and the traffic that we get trying to get to other places. What I'm trying to say is people try to avoid Los Gatos Boulevard. So we have people on Englewood, we have people on Loma, we have people going through Spencer, which happens to be right where I am in this Potter Court. Trying to get out some mornings is very difficult. I have lived in this house for 53 years, and we went through this in the early 2000s when they tried to increase the number of children. We were told that they would be carpooling, that we would not have too many cars. But when you think about 20 more people, I know some people will be walking, which creates other problems too, because then there's no sidewalks on Loma. There's no sidewalks on part of Spencer. So people are walking in the streets with their dogs, with their strollers, children on little scooters. It's a mess. And with the fact that people have GPS now, they try to avoid Los Gatos Boulevard in every way they can. They're zooming through where we are. There's also, I don't think it's a preschool, I think it's a daycare in a house on Spencer, and that creates another problem. Just this morning when I tried to get out, One car was trying to go through, another car was backing out after delivering their child. And I had to sit and wait, several minutes, and they almost hit each other, these two cars. It's very small, narrow streets. And when you have two cars and any parked cars, then it's a problem. Also, if you do add 20 more students, if they all come in cars, you have 80 more cars on the road, dropping off, picking up, dropping off, picking up, going home. Are there any questions you want to ask?
Yeah, any questions?
Yes.
Okay, Vice Chair Hansen.
I understand your concern about the cut-through traffic. Have you called it into the town mentioned your concerns to the town about the cut-through traffic? Because that's not related to the preschool. Have you notified anyone about the issue of the cut-through traffic?
I have not, because I don't want to cause any problems with the people. Are you talking about the traffic from the other?
Yes, I thought you were. If I correct me if I was wrong, I thought you were talking about general people that are trying to avoid the traffic going south on Los Gatos Boulevard are cutting through your neighborhood because they have GPS applications. So my question was, I can imagine that is an actual problem. We've seen it a lot presented to town council. Have you said anything to anyone about that?
I haven't.
Okay.
Because I know there is a problem in town with the traffic. Every place has gotten so much more crowded. And this is what my concern is that it's dangerous for the people who live there, for the people walking, for there's just too many cars.
Okay, thank you you answered my question.
Thank you. I had another question about traffic and the way traffic is routed. I'm not that familiar with the area, but one of the letters that we received from a Mr. Walker suggested that taking down the no right turn sign at Kennedy and Ferris will allow access as it used to be. It's a shorter, safer, and easier access. Is that one of the things that has made the situation more difficult, and is that something you would recommend? That is a no right turn sign at Kennedy and Ferris?
Would I recommend it? No.
Okay.
I would not, because I think that we would even have more cars going through. You cannot turn right, I think, from, 8 to 9, no, okay.
I don't know. And it's a question I'll have for staff as well. So, yeah. But if there are any specifics about traffic that made things worse, it would be good to know. So, thank you. Did I see a hand go up? Yeah, you are welcome to come up and state your name and before we move on. So,
this is Pat Parsegian. I just want to address that last comment about the no turn.
So you're the applicant. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not the applicant.
You already spoke.
I already spoke, but can I just answer your question about?
Sorry, we only allow one time. I was a little confused there. Sorry about that. Okay, I have no more cards. So, Lori Kirkendall. Sorry. Yes, absolutely. No, we can bring the microphone to you. That would be just fine. We've done that many times. So. Okay.
My original note.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. My house can be seen in those pictures. We live directly behind Room 13. Sorry.
We can hear you.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay. Yeah, you can hear me. I used to be on the Park Commission up here once upon a time.
It is important that you speak into the microphone so that it's being recorded for the TV.
Recorder person that I met in the hall. Okay. All right. What do I want to say? I want to say that I am not against the increase in students as long as they can behave themselves and not, well, and I've invited the staff to my house so that they can see that we've lived in our house for 53 years along with the Abrahams. And we just want, the quiet place, do want to say, I am very concerned about room 13. I do not think it should be at all with the students. Also, this quiet place that they're describing, I've heard screams and other noises from that area. So I don't know how they're going to keep the kids quiet in the quiet area. And there is a playground planned. You can see it in the picture, and I can point that out to you. This quiet place is going to be very active. What else? We support the school. I love the church. I love the church. The church is wonderful. We went there for Easter. We do not have enough information about this expansion at all. We were notified by this a week before, or 10 days before this hearing, and we were really upset about that. So that was, I don't know if that was staff, right, Sean? Anyway, we've gotten to know staff fairly well now, and really the traffic should be a stop sign at the, what? I have to end. But, I can tell you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, there may be some questions. None? Okay, thank you. Okay, that was the last card. Unless someone else would like to speak? Yes, go ahead. No problem. Just state your name and address there, and just speak into the microphone. Thank you.
My name is Jacqueline MacDonald. I live on Englewood Avenue. My dad bought his house in 1974, probably before the church, I would imagine. I'm not sure how long the church has been there. I'm not directly affected by that specific room, but I do want to vouch for the noise. I can hear it. I'm not home during the day. I do work. But I do feel like 20 students would add to that. Maybe the 3 additional staff could help with, maintaining that additional 20 students. Also, the traffic in regards to safety. I grew up here my entire life. It's gotten so much worse. Not only Bay Area is obviously getting so much bigger, but in regards to the safety with even the stop signs, they don't do anything. And being a high school student driver as well myself, I definitely know how people fly down that road. We never have, it's a different concern, but we never have police monitoring that area for speed limits or anything like that. And so I do feel like those additional 20 students would potentially be harmed. And there are no sidewalks. There's no, especially on that side. I mean, Englewood has a little bit more space, but on Ferris and that area, it's very narrow. People park their cars. People go around it. Personally, I would feel unsafe with even myself, walking my dog. I'm not sure what the future plans are. I'm sure that eventually childcare is going to be a bigger issue. I grew up with a single dad. I totally understood the issue with finding daycare. I went to a Montessori over in San Jose simply because of that, and also a different preschool over in San Jose. I don't feel as though 20 students is really going to necessarily help with that bigger issue, but I do think that we need a little bit more information with how they're going to maintain the students, the screaming, stuff like that, and the traffic, definitely the traffic. So I just want to voice my concern as a further neighbor. I know I'm not directly up against the room, but I think if we just had a little bit more information, we could kind of gauge the effect. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Question? Yes, Commissioner Badami.
Thank you. You mentioned not feeling safe in the neighborhood with the traffic issues, and that concerns me. I think it would concern anybody. So have you or any of the neighbors considered calling the Los Gatos Monte Sereno Police Department for some extra patrols? Because I think you would find they'd be quite responsive.
My dad definitely has. Just because he saw the increase
from 1974 to now. And we're actually at the point where there's no speed bumps in our area. And just like standing out front in your yard or walking your dog, like they fly down that road. And there's like, you know, my dad's dog was killed on the road, not because of not watching him, but simply because there's not much control on Englewood, and it's a direct parallel route to, I know this is a different issue because Englewood is not related to that, but I know that people, I mean, you can pick up a kid from Mariposa and you could live up near Hillbrook, right? So it does increase traffic all around town. But yeah, definitely that side of town is much narrower streets, and people totally park on the street to park their cars out front, and that makes it even, you know, of a smaller area.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much. Do we have one more? Oh, we have a couple more. Okay. Let me try to get all of them so we can. Okay, Derek Evjeth.
Don't say the J.
Thank you.
Evjeth.
Ah, okay.
So currently I'm at 17265 Clare Street on the backside of Rinconada Golf Course. And so just like Dan, just like Susie, 3 children, they're all at Green Hills now. And I'm at work, so I'm subbing in for my wife now because she's putting the kids to bed. But, you know, we get a frantic call that one day, I think it was in January, we're just told school's closing. So, you know, coming from, I'm married, a first grade teacher, her family's full of educators. I kind of just am standing up here saying, we're losing schools left and right, and this school has availability to open up, and they have 20 more students. You're talking about a drop-off, and I've already been to Mariposa. I think I'm pulling in, so I'm not parking out on the street. I'm pulling into the parking lot, dropping the kids off, and I leave. So I don't see any major issues on parking on the street, and traffic in Los Gatos is a huge deal. I mean, my kids play in the street where we are now, and we have issues with people speeding. So I don't think that's anything new or anything that's going to be, you know, adding 20 people to that, you know, to our school. I literally think that most of these issues you could never pin it on 20 more kids going to school there. And the fact that we're creating more jobs that are here for educators when they're already having a hard enough time getting jobs. We know that they're not paid nearly as much as they should be. So it's kind of crazy that we're even fighting this. I mean, so I don't have much more to say unless you guys have questions for that.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you, and thank you for your comments. Amy, having trouble reading the last name.
It's
so.
Hofer.
Hofer, okay.
Amy Grable Hofer. I live at on Pine Avenue in Los Gatos, and I have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an almost 3-year-old. We had childcare at Little Oak Preschool, and this year we pulled our son out just to have more time at home. My husband's a part-time teacher, and right after we did that, we heard about Green Hills closing, and we couldn't get back into Little Oak for the next year. We couldn't get into Calvary, and we were told we'd be on the wait list, a very long wait list at Mariposa. So I think our timing wasn't great. I live off the boulevard, so I understand the traffic concerns, but I grew up, I spent my life in Los Gatos, I work here, and I can't find a place to send my kids to preschool here. So I would appreciate consideration, just knowing that there's a need for families in the town to send their kids to a preschool. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we are now at the point of the hearing where the applicant may have up to 5 minutes to add further comments about the application, and that would include that 5 minutes would be split between whoever would like to speak.
Thank you. I just think I want to say, in terms of the traffic, I echo what Amy said, and I echo what our neighbors have said. I live on Los Gatos Boulevard. I can't get out of my house at 8 o'clock in the morning. I know that traffic is maybe the number one thing that you guys hear about in these meetings. But the hours are really important here because we have, since I've been the president, paid really close attention to what traffic's like during our drop-off and pickup hours. And if you drive down Ferris Avenue at 9:10 a.m., it's dead. I do this every day, and yet compared to 3:30, dramatically different. I 100% agree, but we created school hours in the spirit of not wanting to impact the traffic during the cut-through times and people are racing to the schools. It really doesn't compete with that. So I want to say that. It's really important that these hours are relevant. And in terms of the noise, again, with the Montessori philosophy, it really is an orderly, they are children, right? You are going to hear a scream every now and again. Someone's going to cry or get hurt. But in general, our curriculum, children are down, they're working, they're having quiet playtimes, as much as any preschool I've ever seen. And I've been to many, I have 3 children also, and I only have 1 at Mariposa. So we're committed to working with our neighbors, and if this goes through, as the president, the conversation doesn't stop here. It really doesn't. I mean, I want to go see Lori, I want to go see Mary, I want to see our neighbors, and even if we get this approval, say, what can we do here? You know, what can we plant a tree? Can we build a hedge? Call us if a noise at a certain time is disturbing you. I am committed to a harmonious relationship. I would not feel good knowing that I had discontented neighbors on the other side of the fence. And so I just want to say that I truly am committed, whether or not we get this approval, to have an ongoing dialogue about their concerns.
Just to echo that last statement, we can't change what isn't acknowledged. So again, please be open, and if you have a concern, please come to us and say, it was really loud yesterday, so that we can address the situation and change it. There was a comment about garden expansion. There is no further expansion going on in that garden area. There's nowhere left to go, and if you want to come by the school, you can see that everything has been addressed and taken care of.
With regard to the noise concerns specific to room 13, I wanted to let the individuals most closely in proximity to that room know that as part of, we are concerned about the noise impact. So on Monday, we did a couple things to try and get an idea of how noise carries from the rooms. So we went outside of the existing 5-day classroom, which is where the older kids are. Those are the similar age kids to what would be in room 13. The fence outside of that classroom is only 6 feet away from the classroom. It's not a solid fence. It's 4 feet high. It's perforated. It's a slat fence. We had an individual stand there with their phone recording. The most noticeable sound is chirping birds. We have the recording if anyone would like to hear it, but the most noticeable sound is chirping birds. You can also hear sort of a background wind sound and a slight background sound of children. That's from 6 feet away without a solid fence or a hedge. So my very firm belief is that in room 13, 12 feet away from a 6-foot solid fence and a very thick hedge with the windows closed, which is what we will do to minimize the impact on the neighbors, I don't think they're going to hear the kids. On Monday, we had 50 kids in there singing. We were, again, trying to get an idea of the noise, singing songs. We sent an individual over to the sidewalk on Potter with their phone on record. Again, chirping birds. Not a resident backing up to that room has even mentioned hearing a thing from that room. They've said the only time they hear sounds from that room is during the, I believe it was the AA meetings. So I absolutely understand the concern. I believe that the reality will be different, and we are committed to making sure we don't impact our neighbors in a negative way.
Okay, thank you. There may be some questions. Vice Chair Hansen.
So I wanted to ask 1 or 2 questions on this traffic. I assume you have some kind of protocol that whenever a new family enrolls and returning every year, that instructs them on what the proper drop-off and pickup procedures are?
We do. We met as a board this spring as well because the drop-off procedure changed slightly. The entire drop-off and pickup procedure occurs within the Mariposa parking lot, an enormous parking lot that goes the entire length of the church property. So during the drop-off and pickup, there is a car line, and there's also a walk-in area.
And it's also addressed in the student handbook.
Do you also give parents guidelines I've seen this done because I was involved with Safe Routes to School. Are you also telling the parents, reminding them that they need to adhere to the local speed limits, and because they are driving through neighborhoods that are 25 miles an hour speed limit and all that stuff. So you are reminding parents of that, and not to be using their cell phones while they're driving. Not that those are the law, but I've seen other schools do this where they make sure that they are mindful of reminding parents of what the law is and what the procedures. Yeah.
So that's not something that I'm aware that we've formally done. However, one of the things that we did draft in response to neighborhood concerns is a letter of recommended actions for parents to take, including basic courtesies to the neighbors in the neighborhood. If someone's trying to get out of their driveway, the courtesies to allow them to get out of their allow them to get out of their driveway. Don't make them wait until we drive by. We're happy to draft a point-by-point list of recommendations to remind the parents of things like that.
Okay, that's good to hear. And then one last question for you. You mentioned the willingness to work with Safe Routes to School. Have you been in touch with them yet? Because I know with
St. Francis School?
You mentioned that you were willing to work with Safe Routes to School.
Oh, Safe Routes. So
yes,
routes.
yes,
Sorry.
yes.
We thought
Yeah.
you said St. Francis School.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Honestly, we're committed to whatever we need to do to keep people safe in our neighborhood. Our children, the neighbors, I mean, if we can participate in that program, we would love to do that. Anything like that. That's.
Have you reached out to them at this point? But it's a thought that you have.
Absolutely, I will.
Okay. You answered my question. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Janoff.
Just a couple, please. Regarding parking and the use of the parking lot, which is huge, it's enviable in the town. Are there any other functions that happen at that facility, whether it's sponsored by the church or the school, that limits the number of parking spaces or traffic as you're doing the drop-off, so that are there functions that would limit how many cars can actually cycle through during your drop-off and pickup times?
So there is a meeting, a Wednesday morning meeting.
I'm sorry, would you mind to speak into the mic?
Sorry about that. So there is a congregation that comes in on Wednesday mornings. They usually have about 10 or 15 cars. We have a car line that drops off about 75% of our students, and the other 25% park their cars and have to wait, so that they're not driving while children are getting out of the car line.
But they're parked in the lot or on the street?
No, in the lot, like past where our car line. We kind of constructed it so that they have to go past the car line, park, and if they want to walk their children in, but then they have to stay there until our car line has completed. But it all happens 100% within the parking lot.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have, that's okay. There was some concern from one of the neighbors regarding lighting, and could we add curtains or some other?
Absolutely.
And
the point about that was, I believe that the lighting is at night, and the upside of Room 13 is that historically the church has used it for these public meetings, AA meetings, or birthday events during the evenings, weekends. Those will no longer occur. So after school hours, that room will be dark, quiet, after school hours, on weekends, and throughout the entire summer. We won't utilize that.
And just to verify, the end of day for Mariposa is 2:30?
2:30. We have aftercare for about 5 children whose parents can't pick them up that early, but it's not. They go to a separate classroom that we currently use. So it's a very, very small number of kids.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? I had a couple of questions. I wanted to kind of get a little more specific with a suggestion that was made about fence and curtains and tree. I believe this was mentioned by in a letter that we received, and also by one of the folks who spoke tonight. So is there anything you could specifically tell us about those ideas about fence or curtains?
So those ideas have come up as a result of the opposition to the expansion. So I think what would be great is if I can meet with the neighbors and we can kind of look at the yards and look at our side yard and see what we need to do within financial reason on our part. But I'm happy to have a discussion and say, what would work here? Is it more a visual that you have a problem with? Maybe we can plant a tree. Is it the noise? Again, We haven't had a noise complaint at all yet, and we don't anticipate with 20 more students that that's going to change. But if it does, let's talk about, is it a certain hour of the day? Are you know, this can be an ongoing dialogue, but those ideas just came about because we're already brainstorming on how we can make this right with them.
So kind of maybe a tough question related to that, though, is if you haven't had that dialogue yet to complete a list of items, would you prefer to have a continuance to have that opportunity to meet with the neighbors and develop a more specific list of items, or would you prefer to just articulate tonight what items you'd like to have for a decision now?
I would prefer to articulate tonight. This is a long, drawn-out process, and I think I was trying to just voice my commitment to doing so. But if there are specific things that the commission believes we should do in order to gain approval, then I would rather articulate them tonight. Right.
Okay. So maybe if other commissioners have any questions about that. I had another one, and which was some other ideas that were raised in letters. One of them was considering a reconfiguration of the playground. Is that anything that you
So I think what's happened is we have a playground in the front of the campus that we had drawings for, but that's long ago been done. There's no plan for any development of the outdoor space on our campus at all. What's done is done, and there's not going to be any development of a playground. I think it's being confused with images of our front playground, which is done. It's not.
Okay. The other suggestion that was in one of the letters was to implement a phased expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And one way that might work is that, which we've done with other conditional use permits, would be to allow a phasing, so some portion of the expansion, and then come back or have a review of the conditional use permit before proceeding with the full amount. Is that something that you've considered or would want to entertain? I'm not saying that we're going to require that.
Right.
I'm just asking for your opinion about it.
We spent a great deal with talking about traffic because we had to address the fee and the impact that this expansion was going to have. And so I've heard about the phased approach with Hillbrook, and I believe it was, a couple hundred, a very large amount of children. In this instance, for the 20 children and the way that our drop-offs are staggered in the morning and even more so in the afternoon, we really didn't feel like staggering the 20 would have that much more of an impact than just the 20 alone.
Okay, thank you. Those are the questions that I have. So thank you very much. And we will now close the public portion of the hearing and move to any questions of staff or comments or discussion. Vice Chair Hansen.
I have a question for staff. It's relative to the staff report. Some people were questioning the 16 peak trips, and the thing that would trigger the more comprehensive study would be if there was 20 trips. So I wonder if you could just remind us all of how that number gets determined. I believe it's by an outside consultant that looks at numbers and.
Sure, thank you. So the 16 trips, the thing to keep in mind is that those are peak hour trips, AM peak 16 trips and PM peak 16 trips. In the staff report, the next paragraph following in that discussion talks about average daily trips, and the town's traffic engineer calculates both these numbers based on manuals and standards in traffic engineering. And the average daily trips is listed as 82, which is more reflective of 20 cars in and out twice a day. So the 16 trips is relative to the AM peak, which is 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., and the PM peak, which is 4 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Okay, and the total that, including the 82 additional trips, do we know that number? That with the 50 students now and the staff, plus there's going to be 82 more, do we know what that total is?
We don't. what's before us is the increase of 20 students, not trips, and the evaluation that staff performs under that request is with regards to the traffic impact policy and what the increase would be based on the request in front of us, which is the 20 children.
Yes, I understand. So one more question, if you'll allow me, Chair. Just so that everyone understands, the way that we're expected to look at traffic relative to any application is only the incremental traffic from this, not the cumulative traffic from cut-through traffic, Hillbrook School, or whatever, that we're expected to view this solely on the basis of the incremental traffic that would be generated by this additional 20 students.
That's correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Badami.
Question for staff. With our current noise ordinance, how likely is it that noise from classroom 13 would impact the Potter Court neighborhood? Would it be any different from living in a residential neighborhood where maybe you live next door to a family with 5 young children?
So we do have decibel noise. We have a noise ordinance, and they would have to comply with that. So you would take it, the question I am hesitating on is whether you have commercial property next to residential property. So do we use the commercial DBs, or do we use the residential DBs? We've done it both ways. With Toll House, we use the residential, but for HAPAs that came forward, we use commercial. So we have gone both ways with that. But there isn't much difference anyways. It's a 5-degree dB difference. But they will have to comply with our noise ordinance. So if there was a complaint for noise, we would go out, and if it's continuous, obviously if it's just one scream and it's not there when we get out there, but we do go out and we do dB readings, and if they are over the noise ordinance, they would be cited for the violation of the noise ordinance.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Janoff.
I don't have a question of staff, but I'd like to make a discussion point unless.
Okay, I had a couple questions. Maybe I could just get those out of the way. There were some concerns raised about notice and neighborhood outreach. Is the applicant in compliance with the notice requirements, and is there typically a neighborhood outreach requirement for this type of thing?
So the noticing was done per town and legal standards. The notice was sent out, I can look in the file while we discuss the second point. The staff strongly, as with every application, recommends that the applicant reach out to the neighbors. We don't hold up applications when no response is received to that recommendation. Public notice was sent out and put in the mail May 10th of this year.
Okay, thank you. And one more question about traffic. And I know we have a pretty complex traffic situation there that is somewhat impacted by the other school for Marchmont. And there was a letter from a Mr. Walker that raised the question about taking down the no right turn sign at Kennedy and Ferris to allow access as it used to be. Is that something that has been considered, or is that something that should be considered by our traffic engineers?
The Parks Public Works Department, including the engineers and the traffic engineer, reviewed the project and didn't make any recommendations like that.
But certainly they can continually review that and do review traffic patterns and issues, and the person that wrote that letter could also reach out and ask for them to look at that issue again. I think it was done specifically for some cut-through traffic that was existing. So, I mean, just because of this project doesn't mean that can't be ongoing reviewed.
Right, and I'd certainly be willing to make that inquiry of the traffic engineers as well. Okay, thank you. No other questions? Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, just a few comments. I'm summarizing the neighbors' concerns to boil down to noise from the children, traffic issues, and a little bit of concern over light and visual privacy. I feel confident that the steps taken by the school so far particularly the recent experiments to determine the noise emanating from room 13 are in a positive direction. And we didn't hear any neighbors comment about those 50 children singing in the middle of the day, and maybe you weren't home, I don't know. But I think that's a compelling point from my standpoint. Also, you mentioned that the 70 students would be split into 4 groups taking outdoor breaks versus the 50 currently taking breaks in 3 groups. And yeah, when you do the math, that's 17 kids outside at any one time, either way. So from that standpoint, it sounds like there won't be additional outdoor noise with the addition of the 20 students. So I find that to be compelling. The need for daycare, childcare, early care is absolutely heart-wrenching. I feel your pain, and there's just no good solution for it. I think adding 20 students is a minor step in making a difference, a positive difference to the needs of the town. I find that a worthy cause. I don't think phasing in the 20 students makes sense because you're basically filling a classroom and your needs are so much more than 20. I'm not sure, you take on the expense of staffing a classroom without the number of students, so I'm not sure that makes sense. So I'm in general favor of the school's expansion of 20 students. I did want to ask my fellow commissioners, however, whether it would make sense to include some annual review along the lines of what has been done with Hillbrook, where we ask the school to provide a report letting us know whether there have been complaints, what steps have been taken to continue discussions and try to find solutions to neighbor concerns. That seemed to be a positive thing in the Hillbrook conditions of approval, and it may make sense for this one.
Commissioner Badami.
I agree with Commissioner Janoff's comments. I think an annual review would be a good thing. Hillbrook actually added 99 students, and with the traffic issues and the amount of students, they were required to do, I think, a comprehensive traffic study, which this school is not required to do. And along those lines, the parking and traffic issues have gotten the green light from the town. And that includes the council unanimously granting a waiver of the traffic impact management fees. So I'd like to see us tighten up the CUP with some of these issues. For example, an annual review, not necessarily staggering the increase of students like we did with Hillbrook before we grant the increase, because I don't think that 20 makes that big of a difference, but I think it would make a big difference to the working parents and even the single parents, not just the dual working parents. You've got single parents too, that it creates a hardship where they don't have any place to place their young children. So I'd like to see us consider some tree plantings to screen classroom 13 and provide a buffer. I'd like to see traffic recommendation letter that was suggested by the school be provided to parents. I'd like to see the school also meet with Safe Routes to School. And again, I'd like to see an annual review where it comes back to us to make sure that the neighborhood and the school were able to work harmoniously, because I see a real effort and concern that I feel is genuine and sincere.
Does that sound like a motion?
I'd be happy to make a motion.
Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead. All right. I move to approve conditional use permit U-19-003, requesting approval of a modification to an existing conditional use permit for an increase in student enrollment in a nursery school, being Mariposa Montessori School. I can make the required findings for CEQA. I can make the required findings for a conditional use permit as required by section 29.20.190. I would also add conditions to the CUP, as I mentioned, which there were 4, that tree plantings for screening in proximity to classroom 13 be recommended by town staff in working with the applicant. and hopefully input provided by the neighbors. Traffic recommendation letter provided to the parents of the school, and meet with Safe Routes to School, and we schedule an annual review to check on the progress.
Thank you. I would,
Would that-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would that review be just for 1 year, or do you want to see it every single year?
Just 1 year.
Okay, I would second the motion, but I would ask, first of all, I would ask the maker of the motion whether she'd be willing to include a requirement for a public outreach meeting as this is at the initial part within the next month to discuss some of the other ideas that were brought up as well.
Yes, the maker of the motion accepts that.
Okay. And maybe I could just add a comment as well, since I've seconded it. These are very, very difficult situations where we're balancing needs across neighborhoods and across the town. And we're meant to serve the town, but we have to recognize that there are needs within a very immediate neighborhood as well. Given the circumstances of the lack of child care and preschool options that seems to be, from all of the evidence, getting worse, it does, in my mind, tip the balance toward that direction, even though I know it's going to cause some difficulty for folks who are very close to it. So it's difficult for me, but I have to kind of look at the whole balance of the situation. Yes, Vice Chair Hansen.
So I was going to suggest exactly what the chair suggested to add, since it seems very sincere that the applicant was willing and more than willing to meet with the neighbors. I think to be good neighbors that you're taking that step, and then now that it's in the conditions of approval, I think that that will help. I do hear, and I agree with other commissioners' comments about the pluses and minuses of the situation. And so I would also just like to comment that I would encourage all the people in the neighborhood to continue to stay in contact with the town, because, we hear many of these kind of applications, and there's all the traffic that you're dealing with every day. And then there's the traffic from this incremental thing, and the thing that you feel the pain of is the thing that you're dealing with every day. And I've driven down Englewood before, and I know that the traffic is really bad on Los Gatos Boulevard, and I wasn't aware that Hillbrook had a bus stop there, but I drive by the one on Shannon, and it does create a big issue with parents crossing the street and everything. So I would encourage the residents of the neighborhood to stay in contact with the town and make sure that they're hearing these concerns, because that's the only way that we can address cumulative traffic issues, is to take those at the town level and not assign them to a specific application. So I will be supporting the motion.
Okay, then I will call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Are there appeal rights, or is this a recommendation?
There are appeal rights. The decision is appealable within 10 days through the city clerk's office, with fees and applications upstairs.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Arnowitz. So from a process perspective, we've reached the end of item 3. We have several more items on our agenda. I would like to continue on right now. I do want to remind folks that we will be taking public testimony on item 3 if they would like to speak. I don't have any cards currently, but as I mentioned earlier, we are able to do that, I think. And so we'll take the staff report and the public comments, and then we'll take a break after that. Thank you very much. So item 3 is Town Code Amendment, Hillside Fences, Town Code Amendment Application A19001. Consider amendments to Chapter 29, Fences, Hedges, and Walls of the Town Code
regarding fences, hedges, and walls in the hillside area. Applicant is the town of Los Gatos, and project planner is Sean Mullen. This is continued from March 13, April 10, May 8, 2019. So, Mr. Mullen, you are giving another staff report tonight.
Thank you. At the April 10th meeting, the Planning Commission continued this item with specific direction to return with a revised draft ordinance in response to the direction. The ordinance before you tonight addresses this direction and now includes an intent and definitions sections, requires perimeter fencing to be wildlife friendly in the hillside area, prohibits solid fencing in the hillside area, restricts fencing from riparian corridors, allows maintenance and or replacement of historic stone or river rock walls, includes a section outlining penalties for unlawful construction of fences, and provides a process for property owners to request an exception from these fence regulations. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward the draft ordinance to the Town Council with a recommendation for approval. And this concludes staff's presentation of the staff report, and we are available to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions of staff? Vice Chair Hansen.
I had a question. It was my understanding, and I might have forgotten, that when we were going through the draft back in April, that we had ended up deciding that one way to handle this issue of perimeter fencing, was, especially because we have smaller lots, was to basically have a provision that if lots were less than 1 acre, that these hillside considerations would not apply to them. Like, for instance, they wouldn't have to have a wildlife-friendly, fence at the perimeter.
Sure, and we looked at that again today after the staff report was drafted and released, and there was a long discussion about that, and I think there was opinions on both sides, and it was hard to establish whether there was consensus, and we would be happy to add that into the report and have suggestions on how to incorporate it if that's something that the majority feels.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is staff wasn't sure we had consensus, even though we might have talked about it. Okay,
that's correct.
Thank you. Other questions of staff? Okay. I don't have any questions of staff at this point. I think I have one for later. So I will now open the public portion of the hearing. So I have Dr. Weissman and then Gary Colsatt.
I mostly want to address the issue of specific perimeter fence setbacks. I realize this is a tough decision, but that's why you guys get the big bucks. And we talked about this at the last meeting. The importance of this, don't take my word for it, the town attorney was in agreement that you should set a specific fence setback. Commissioner O'Donnell was concerned about the ability of people to game the system. In other words, could you put a non-wildlife friendly fence 6 inches in from the perimeter line? I'm not sure about you, but I'm not even exactly sure where my property line is unless I had it surveyed. Certainly not within 6 inches. We've also had a couple of other issues that you've got in our letter, but the main one that we're concerned with is the setback. And we just don't see it working unless you specify. I'm not sure whether it's 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet. And you certainly don't have to get it right the first time. We can have a review at 1 year or 2 years just to see how things are working. And most of the properties in the hillsides are not going to be affected by it. It's going to be more for new properties that are coming up when large parcels are subdivided. at the last meeting, there were concerns expressed about odd-shaped lots, lots where the LRDA abuts up on the property line, as expressed by Gary H. One of the commissioners was concerned about properties where owners have dogs. And the nice thing about the staff's draft is that there is a robust appeals process built into it, and we support that. We're not here to try to limit property owners' rights. We think that a compromise can be reached between what property owners need and what the animals need. But without a specific thing set up, we just don't see it working. We also had talked before about one size doesn't fit all, and we came in with lots less than 1 acre would be exempt, lots 1 acre to 1.5 acres, and so forth. So we've tried.
Thank you. Are there questions? Commissioner Badami.
What specific distance are you recommending for the perimeter fencing? Is it 10, 15, 20 feet? What's your recommendation?
We looked in the literature to try to come up with a number. And I even called a couple of local folks who do EIRs. And apparently there's nothing that's really been studied well. That's why we're suggesting, and Commissioner O'Donnell supported using the setbacks that are already in the town codes. We could come up with something different, but again, let's bring it back, pick a number, bring it back in a year, and let's see how it's working. Portola Valley has much more liberal setbacks than we ever proposed. And when I spoke to one of their planners, she said in the 10 years that they've been dealing with this, there have been basically no one's objected. There's been no problem.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, thank you. Gary Colsat.
Good evening, everybody. I just have a few comments about this fence ordinance. As you know, I do quite a bit of hillside residences, and this affects several of my clients. First of all, when I read the definition of wildlife fencing, I was a little bit puzzled, because more puzzled not by the definition, but by why anybody would actually install a fence like that. It's 18 inches off the ground and 42 inches high. I mean, I don't know what the point is for that. But my main concern is, and I do appreciate what is in item number 8 of the appeals process. I think that's a very good idea, to let planning director and planning staff and ultimately planning commission help decide on special circumstances for fencing. But I read that there's a fee involved. And I think that, while I understand that staff needs to be able to pay for their time, I want to know what the fee is going to be. Is it going to be a couple $100? Is it going to be a couple $1,000? Because I see probably the majority of my clients going to opt to appeal the fence ordinance as is. And it's just a reality of the clientele we have in Los Gatos. So that's all.
Thank you. Questions? Yeah, Vice Chair Hansen.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. I thought it was interesting, your comment about why build a wildlife-friendly fence. So I'm going to change that into a question to you, which is, your clients that would want to build a fence in the hillsides, what do they want to build it for?
The majority of them are building it to keep the wildlife out of their immediate property, to keep their children safe, keep their pets safe. You've got mountain lions, on, Loma Alta and everything. So you can't escape it. It's going to have wildlife. And I think that anybody with a large hillside property is is insane to try to fence the whole thing. I mean, why live up there? But some people want to fence certain portions of their property. And they want to do it, but you have to do it for a pool if you happen to have a pool. You want to do it just for this sense of security, even though animals can get up and around and over these fences. But that's generally why they're doing it. Another reason, to be candid, is just a sense of marking their territory. They don't want, you know, people walking through, seeing, oh, there's a path between these two fences. I'm going to cut through and go up to the open space, and if it's not actually an easement, right? But now it becomes an easement. So there's reasons people just don't want people walking on their property, and that's what fences do.
Supposing that we did go in the direction of having, say, let's just for the sake of argument, a 10-foot setback, how would you see see clients managing that? Because you have a fence up to 10 feet, and then what happens to the other 10 feet in between there and the property line, or let's say it's 20?
It's a great question, because what does happen to that no man's land? It becomes less maintained. It becomes potentially liability for someone that's on that property that's not supposed to be there, and they get hurt. Their other neighbors might say, hey, that's you put your fence there. You usually put your fence on a property line. Why is it, that means my property is bigger now. Wow, great, then I can use that. So I see a lot of potential issues with that. Again, no size fits all. No site is the same. And there's a lot of these hillside home properties that you would only consider fencing a portion of anyway. So I'm not sure that this is the biggest issue we have here, but it is going to come up, and I know on certain properties it's going to be the biggest contention of the whole project is the fence, and not the grading or the architecture or the height or the reflectivity value or something.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Last card I have is Don Wimberly.
Thank you, Commissioners. And how to get the last word is sneak the card in last. First, let me say I support your draft. I think it's a good compromise, as you state in your intent, between the rights and desires of citizens who own property in the hillsides versus enhancing animal movement. Using the building setback for your fence ordinance, as you well know, building setbacks are rather generous in the hillsides, 25 feet, 30 feet, depending upon whether it's side or front. That becomes very problematic because of the variation in lots as to size, slope, the building site locations, features of the property, be it riparian corridors or other features, locations for accessory structures, landscaping, where's a good area, where isn't. So taking a big chunk out of those setbacks, which in the case of our property would eliminate our ability to use about 35% of the lot if you just said you can't have that fenced in. So I urge you not to develop that. And part of the reason is that there is very little property that isn't either already developed or will be coming before DRC, coming before yourselves and council. That'll be a time when you can apply intelligent decision as to fences, wildlife corridors, all those sorts of things, as opposed to the blunt instrument of a setback line. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, I do have a couple more cards actually. Peter Donnelly and then Bess Wiersma.
Good
Good evening. Peter Donnelly from 15305 Seaview Drive. I did not prepare any comments, so if I'm not completely clear, my apologies. First of all, I think what's been presented is a much better draft than some of the previous versions that have seemed to flow from one side of the argument to the other, so that's good. It's compromise. And I think it successfully balances the need of the wildlife and the need of the property owners, of which I'm one. This draft does provide for homeowners to protect parts of their property, whether it be a swimming pool or a garden, ornamental garden, pets. It allows for that in this current draft. It excludes certain materials, which I think are good to exclude those because they're not really particularly good materials to use in fencing, but that's the only restriction that's there. It does call for no perimeter fencing that's not wildlife friendly. And I just want to comment on this. I don't want to see our hillsides encircled with 6-foot chain link fences. Just don't want to see it. I have a large property, and I'm not going to put a 6-foot tall chain link fence around my property, and I don't think we should encourage that inside the town. However, the draft that you put in place today calls for wildlife-friendly fencing along the perimeter. If you're going to put a perimeter fencer in, it has to be wildlife-friendly. To Dr. Weissman's comment, there's nothing in the draft right now that says take a step 1 foot back and put up a 6-foot tall chain link fence. And that's a weakness in the draft that stands before you today. And I think you ought to do something to address it. Very difficult to come up with the right way to address it. I've made certain suggestions. Other suggestions have been made, whether it be relevant to the property size, whether it be a 5-foot, 10-foot, 15-foot, or something that's already defined, standard setbacks. You guys ought to find those, but you can't leave the draft as is right now because it'll just basically be circumvented by taking a step back from the property line. And I think that would be a shame. A lot of work's gone into this. But good job so far getting there. It's only been about a year, I think.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
That's my comments.
Any questions? Okay, Bess Wiersema.
Good evening, Commissioners. Bess Wiersema, Studio 3. I wasn't going to address anything on this issue until I heard Chairman Hansen's question, which I thought was actually relatively relevant, and it made me think about how we approach hillside home designs. And I think that the same amount of appreciation and site evaluation should perhaps be taken with fences and not have it be arbitrarily applied to a building setback. When we look at hillside properties, we also work with the planning department, our planners, planning manager, et cetera, to look at the LRDA. It's something that you guys also look at when we have a house that comes before you. So to take a flat site plan and apply a setback that's written on a chart based on a size of a piece of property and then say that that's where a fence should go, if it's not going to go right on the property line, is not necessarily relevant to each individual site based upon its site conditions. And I would encourage you, rather than putting some specific number in, to leave it up to staff to work with each individual site and each individual project and not define a specific number, because as we know, hillside sites are unique compared to downtown and more modulated site plans. And that's all I would suggest.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you. So those are all of the public cards that I have at this point. I think we will take a 10-minute break and resume at 9 o'clock. And at that point, if staff would like to address some of these at once, and then we'll go to Q&A after that. Okay, thank you. We're back in session, and we will continue on with item number 3. And we've closed the public comments portion of the hearing, and now it's time for us to ask any questions of staff or begin a discussion. So we'll start down the line. So Commissioner Badami.
Mr. Colsat had asked a question that I thought was worthy of asking staff. So what would be the fees to appeal a fence ordinance?
The current fee schedule includes a fence height exception, which is what we would use, and it's $240.
Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Hansen.
I actually have a couple of questions, but I'll just ask one for the moment because I saw that my other commissioners wanted to ask. Supposing that right now our ordinance defines the property line, the perimeter fence as being on the property line. So supposing that the worst case thing happened that was mentioned by Dr. Weissman, someone goes and builds a huge 6-foot fence 6 inches inside their property line. What could we do about that? I mean, to me, that it would violate the spirit of the ordinance. But you know, because I don't think you could put a foot or even 2 feet because you just don't know what close would be. But so what would happen under the current ordinance if someone actually built a big fence 6 inches inside the property line?
With respect to all the property lines except the front, the current ordinance would allow you to do that, to move the fence in X amount of feet and build it to the maximum. The reason I accept the front is that the current ordinance and the draft ordinance actually both require that or limit fencing to 3 feet in height within the front setback, and also that they be visually open within 20 feet of a roadway.
So what could we do? Let's just say that, you know, my neighbor, this ordinance went through as it was, my neighbor, you know, went and built a big, huge fence 6 inches inside the property line, and I called the town about it. Is there anything we could do? Or what could we do to make sure that doesn't happen?
To the first question, you know, if you called because you had a concern, then it would be an enforcement issue. We would check the fence if it complied with the rules, even if it is just 6 inches inside the property line. Then there's no action there. To your second question, I think that's what's really been discussed for the past 2 years. This is one of the critical pieces. Is what is that point? Is it the perimeter? Is it 10 feet? Is it 15 feet? And the concern on the other side of the argument is how to apply a one-size-fits-all approach to a very complicated set of properties in a very old town.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner
Janoff. Well, you know, we're sort of in this rock and hard place spot, and it seems to me that the concept of having an exemption for certain lot size or smaller would help us get out of that. And so I would be in favor of no specific setback number, but an exemption for lot sizes. Give a reasonable number or smaller, because those are the lots, the smaller size lots in the hillside will be the ones most inclined or most interested in having a perimeter fence, and that makes sense. So let's not. I mean, the fee is minor, relatively minor, $240 as fees goes. That's not too bad. But you know, you'd have a lot of people with small lots asking for exemptions. So. And paying a fee when, you know, that we could exempt that away.
Commissioner Batami.
So here are my comments so far with this draft ordinance and what we're struggling with. I agree with what Commissioner Janoff just said. I think that an exemption for lot sizes under 1 acre makes sense. Also, addressing Exhibit 22, I think that I would fully be in agreement in keeping setbacks for strangely shaped lots. I also would want to see a riparian setback of 20 feet. I also would want to see the penalty issues for the housekeeping addressed to specify the town code section. So those to me are kind of no-brainers, but what I'm still struggling with is still coming up with a specific distance other than the lot sizes under 1 acre, if we should or should not have a specific distance. I don't know what the right answer is there. And we still need to talk about yard fences, you know, distinguishing them from a perimeter fence where you might have the need to have both because you've got dogs and, you know, that you want to contain within your yard. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen.
So I wanted to comment on the issue of the lot size acre or less. My personal opinion is that I think that we need to put in that to exempt houses less than an acre. Those houses are almost certainly going to want to have a perimeter fence, and so it doesn't seem equitable to me to ask them to have to pay money for exception, even if it's only $240, when someone with a 5-acre lot, wouldn't have that issue because they probably wouldn't want a perimeter fence. They'd need fences for certain things that they're doing in their yard. And so I to me, that seems like an equity issue. So I don't know if the acre is the right number, but I think we should think about putting that back in there, and that would take away a lot of the exceptions. And then as far as like the idea of the perimeter fence and the property line or a setback, I don't think we can come up with a number that's going to work. And then as was discussed in some of the testimony, I mean, you start putting a setback, and then what happens to the other 10 feet beyond that? And, you know, if there's a liability issue, and I just think that that's going to cause more problems than it's worth. And also I would say that the original draft that was recommended by council didn't even have the idea of the perimeter fence. So I think we're taking a step in the right direction to put some restrictions on perimeter fencing. But I think we have to avoid going too far. So I'm almost like, I think we could go with the draft as it is, with adding the riparian setback of 20 feet that was discussed by, Commissioner Bodami brought it up, and it was also in the comments that we received. And then I would also be okay if we added the thing in where the lot sizes of less than an acre would not be subject to the specific hillside rules.
I wanted to add a few comments. It appears that there may be the forming of a majority on making a recommendation. However, I have some serious concerns with this issue. As I have experienced this process, it seems as though as we get closer to a solution, it's one of those problems where continually new problems come up. And I think that there are some fundamentals with this that I am not feeling comfortable that I will be able to get to a resolution on. And so I'd like to just articulate a few of those. I think that we end up in trying to engineer a solution to this where we end up with a regulation that's either, arbitrary and therefore somewhat ineffective because it's always being challenged, or something that is so discretionary that it's also ineffective. And this comes to light the more I look at actual examples in the hillside. So I think a number of us actually are on hillside properties, and I think we've wrestled with some issues about our own specific properties. But the more I understand, the more I understand that I don't know enough about the specifics of all the hillside properties to be able to solve enough problems that I would feel comfortable. The other part of this is that I think that this should be implemented townwide, not just in the hillside, for a number of reasons. As actually, I think all of the examples of other municipalities that we've seen have done. I think a better basis for implementing this would be on a lot size basis. And for a number of reasons. One of them is that wildlife doesn't
constrain itself to our zoning maps and congregate in those areas. There are numerous pockets that are supportive of wildlife along the creeks, along the parks, where there's a lot of anecdotal stories about wildlife, and I've seen a lot of them myself. And I actually think that it's in those areas where it's more important because they're pressured by more urban development. It would actually be more important to have wildlife corridors in those areas as compared to the hillsides. So I think that a better solution would be on a lot size basis. I think it'd be fairer, and I think it'd be easier to come up with some of the solutions that we keep wrestling with. I also think that because we don't really address this, I think that, and this was stated by Mr. Wimberly in one of his letters, that if we're not really doing this equitably, then, and we're not really addressing where the wildlife issue is, then the ordinance is unreasonable, confiscatory, and unwarranted, and difficult to enforce. So I have issues with that. I also think that we haven't resolved this perimeter definition issue, and it seems to be one that we get closer and further from each time, but I think it's a critical issue. I think the yard fence hasn't been adequately addressed. And then finally, and I've expressed this before, is that I think that by starting here, the town is being somewhat hypocritical because the town could address this in areas where there are fences either on town property, that is hillside, or along creeks. And I ride past these and I see these chain link fences or other kinds of fences, and I just wish the town would sort of start by getting its own house in order before requiring all the residents to do so. So I know this is a recommendation, but for those reasons, I would be more interested in actually denying the motion for the ordinance at this point. So I'd be interested in reactions. Commissioner Janoff.
Well, I think hearing from our commission this evening, there's general agreement about having a lot size restriction rather than a setback. So that, assuming we can determine the size that we're starting with, and there's been less than an acre or 1 acre or less, something along that line sounds like what we can reach agreement around. So I think that would work. Your concern about the wildlife traversing creeks and sort of natural features of the land that they would be drawn to for water, vegetation, whatnot, that's actually improved if we reinsert the 20 feet off of the riparian corridor, which was in a previous draft. So I think we've got at least two solutions that help. Whether the town is hypocritical or is strapped for funds to replace its fences, I won't comment, but I think that leaves us basically at, do we want to implement something of a setback for lots? If we have an exemption for 1 acre or smaller lots, do we want to implement a setback to the perimeter fencing for lot sizes larger? So
I might just respond that my concerns are about the creek area and the lot size actually applies outside of the hillside areas. And this doesn't address that. So as it's drafted at all, this is based on rules for the hillside and not based on lot size across town. So my deep concern is although might be helped in the hillside, is not helped at all. Yeah, go ahead.
If we include the exemption under section 29.40.035, that's a general exemption, and it doesn't, we don't specify lot sizes in the hillside area, that, if I'm reading the structure of the ordinance correctly, that's not hillside specific under the exemption paragraph. And I suppose we could, I mean, I would have no issue with the 20 feet off a riparian corridor. I think that's in building code anyway, in some municipalities, so that could also be moved to the exemption, which would be townwide.
Vice Chair Hansen?
I wanted to bring up the issue about the yard fences. I think this goes back to, again, the size of the lot, because if you have a lot size of an acre or less, I mean, I'm just throwing that number. You could have a 1.1 acre lot and have the same issue, but I think that we got testimony earlier from one of the architects too, is that when people have very, very big yards, particularly if they're going to put up a wildlife friendly fence, then why would they even put up a fence? But if you have a smaller yard, I don't see someone with a 1 acre lot going and building little islands of fences. I'm going to put a fence around my pool, and I'm going to put a fence around my garden, and I'm going to put another fence around this, and I'm going to put another, and then you're going to have like 5 different little fence circles inside this 1 acre lot. It's going to be it's not going to look great, and it's going to be not in the spirit of what we wanted to do. And so I don't know that the yard fence thing is such a big issue. I think that what we've put in here is that if you're going to have a perimeter fence, it needs to be wildlife friendly, unless you have one of these smaller lots. And as to the comment about the whole town, I think I don't disagree with what the chair said, because there's deer running around all kinds of parts of town, and so I think the lot size thing could address that, but it's the council that's already decided to bifurcate the ordinance. I mean, we could I suppose we can make a recommendation to say that if we want to have wildlife friendly fencing, that it should apply to the entire town. But I think that decision was made already, unless we want to make a recommendation otherwise.
I'm going to try a motion, which I think may not have a lot of support, but I will move to deny in our recommendation to deny this draft that's come before us for an ordinance. And although there were some suggestions made that might help, I think that there's still a lot of complexities regarding the implementation in the hillside and other issues that have been raised. So that's my motion. Is there a second? Okay, motion fails for lack of a second. Commissioner Badami.
I really don't like continuances, but we're missing almost half of the commission. So we could continue and see what our other commissioners feel about the current ordinance, or if they have further thoughts in fine-tuning the issues that we're struggling with. Otherwise, one of us could make a motion to forward the application to town council with consideration of the comments made by commissioners and the public. But it seems that we're not doing them any great favors, because there are a lot of complexities, as Chair Hughes said, and I don't think any of us could unanimously agree on those complexities. What's the right distance? How many feet? How do we define perimeter fencing? No other jurisdiction does, really, that we could come up with other than along the property lines. And it didn't, I think we're stating on the property line. I think Woodside did say along the property line, but I don't think we can find any other jurisdiction that gets any more specific.
One of the other challenges that I've wrestled with on this is that particularly as you get to smaller lots that are still in hillside, I'll just take the hillside concept for a minute. You still have the issue of a lot of fences are good neighbor fences. And so, you know, you've got a fence ordinance, and now you've got the complexity of needing to implement this with, you know, 1, 2, or 3 property owners, which, you know, I'm sure can be done, but it does also add to the complexity of the issue. Because, you know, we're not only dealing with completely new areas, we're also dealing with what's permitted in the case of a fence replacement. Commissioner Janoff.
You know, it's not really in my, there's no desire on my part to impede reasonable use of one's property and fencing of one's property. And I think this ordinance that we have will never be perfect. It just cannot be perfect. We cannot get to the level of detail that would satisfy all of the complexities or all of the variations of lots that we have in town. And so it's my feeling that we can only do the best that we can based on the input from staff, the input from the community, and the deliberation from the commission. So I'd like to make a motion that we forward this draft of the ordinance to the town council with the following changes. Add under paragraph, I guess it's A3C, location, that no fence, wall, or gate shall be located within 20 feet of the riparian corridor. Under section 29.40.0325, I would recommend an exemption for 1 acre or less sized lots. And I would recommend that we clarify section 29.40.0330, where we change the reference to Division 9, Article 2, to the applicable code section as recommended by the community input. And that would be my motion.
I will second
Vice
the
Chair
motion.
Hanson. Yep. Thank you. Commissioner Badami.
Would the maker of the motion consider keeping setbacks for strangely shaped lots, adding that to the motion?
How large a lot are we talking?
Well, you could have a large lot that's strangely shaped that's over an acre. It could be very narrow.
I'm not inclined to include setbacks only because the long and narrow, the strange thing that goes along the crest of a hill and on the Greenridge Terrace properties to come. I think it's too hard to specify that setback. I think that's what's been a particularly problematic number for us. The testimony that I believe Dr. Weisman provided that said no other jurisdiction is able to establish a setback is probably reflective of the difficulty of coming up with a number to apply to a certain type of irregular lot. I think it just becomes, personally, I think it becomes problematic, and I would not want to include that in the motion.
Okay. Vice Chair Hanson.
I just wanted to make one more comment, and that is I completely agree with Commissioner Janoff's comments. We've been working on this a long time, and you know, where we came from on this is that that there was some need to put into more specificity in terms of an ordinance what we have in the Hillside Design Guidelines. And if you look at kind of where we are, where we were, and where we are now, we at least have something that is a large percentage of the way there. It is not perfect. We're going to find out that people will game it and stuff, but we've made a huge step forward. And I don't think with a continuance and having the other commissioners here that we're going to come to sets of numbers that are going to really, you know, pin this thing in any more than it is. So I feel that we should go forward with this and then see where it goes with the council, because I think it's pretty good where it stands right now.
Commissioner Badami.
I'll be supporting the motion. When I look at the 3 directives that we were given by town council in our staff report, I think for the most part, we've met that. So I will be in support of the motion.
Okay, so let me call the question. All those in favor?
And we needed the reference to the findings that you
Yes.
need to make, that it's consistent on Exhibit 2, I believe it is.
I can make the required findings for CEQA, and I can make the required findings for the general plan for Chapter 29 of the Town Code.
And I'll just add a little anecdotal information. You know, doing this 30 years, I see many ordinances, and you guys have wrestled with some very difficult issues that aren't out there. But what I can say is yes, if it is gamed, if there are situations, doesn't mean it can't come back to you. So I would be pretty surprised if at some point in time, like our tree removal permit needs updating and all the other ordinances that we do at some point in time, they do come back for you. So there might be along the way when we notice things that aren't working or are working, we can come back to you and update it.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Hansen?
Do I need to amend my second to include the findings?
Yes.
I do.
Okay. I will again try to call the question. All those in favor? Okay, I have 3 and opposed 1. So it passes, and I believe since this is a recommendation, there's not an appeal. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Now we move on to another townwide amendment, which is item number 4, Town Code Amendment Demolition Regulations, Town Code Amendment Application A19003. Consider amendments to Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Town Code regarding demolition regulations. The applicant is the town, and Jennifer Armour. Ms. Armour, I think you'll be giving us the staff report.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. The item in front of you is consideration of changes to the definition of demolition as recommended by Town Council Policy Committee and the Historic Preservation Committee and forwarded to you for your recommendation to Town Council. The recommendation from Policy Committee impacts the current definition of demolition in 2 ways: to remove the contiguity requirement from the demolition definition for both non-historic and historic homes, and 2, to allow an exception to demolition requirements for repair of non-historic homes that's currently only available for historic homes. These changes are intended to streamline the land use process and reduce costs for remodels of existing homes. This concludes staff's presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, I have one, and it relates to a comment that was raised, I believe, at the Historical Preservation Committee about the possibility that there would be slivers. I believe Mr. Spalding raised a possibility that, you know, we wanted to avoid owners slicing and dicing small pieces to meet the substantial exterior wall area requirements, and he suggested to stipulate a certain dimension, such as nothing less than 2 feet. Is that something that you considered, and do you consider this slicing or slivering issue a way that this might be abused as it's currently drafted?
I would say that you know, it is possible that you would have fragmented elements of buildings in remodel, but I'm not sure that there's a good clear way to easily set up a definition for that, unless you want to go back to the contiguity, which requires the connection between all of the area to be counted towards the 50%.
I think his concern was that, you know, you could have a sliver that's the size of a 2x4.
Yeah, and I think that goes beyond the intent of the changes to the ordinance to envision that level of, as you say, slicing and dicing.
And through the chair, I would just add that, as with the previous item, if we find that folks are using it to, use that type of scenario to not be required to go through architecture and site, then again, we would probably ask that both the Planning Commission and the council revisit that issue.
Okay, thank you. No other questions, and I'll open the public portion of the hearing. I have a card from Bess Wiersma, and then David Zikovich, and Gary Colsat, and Jennifer Kretschmer. So, Bess Wiersma, you're first.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm sure you probably understand from seeing all of us at different times that the whole demo diagram is a very complex and unique thing we have to deal with on every single project that we address in Los Gatos. I think one thing that we all have in common, regardless of the projects that either come before you or simply stay at a level of planning discretion, is that the demo diagram and current policy is something that is extremely cumbersome, does not protect the intent of what I think probably it was initially meant to, and creates problems rather than addressing them. The strict policy around how these are policed and monitored, both in drawing form and in the actual built environment, creates an extensive amount of problems, ranging from things that I think impact design overall, all the way to not being helpful in terms of how we have to build today compared to how houses were built that we are touching. I think we could all probably speak on this for a lot longer than the 3 minutes we're each allowed to do. I did just bring a few pictures of some examples of items that I just want you to understand are protected according to the current way, and even the proposed way of looking at this that I think are not in buildings best practices, let alone code compliant, structural, et cetera. For instance, this is a current project. This is a cardboard wall that's currently being encased inside of a home. Yes, a cardboard wall. There it actually is. That's your demo plan at work. Doesn't work structurally. Doesn't connect to a foundation. But by God, let's keep it to maintain the integrity of the house in the demo diagram. Here's another house where I have pulled off the skin on the inside of the building, only to discover that it's rotten. Super duper rotten. If I take the stucco off on the outside, now I'm a technical demo, and it's an issue. I think what's important for you guys to see and understand with some of these examples is that the policy does not work. And the current definition, while a great step forward, especially with the loss of the line of contiguity from a definition, we need to also address the skin of the building, what we consider to be 50%. Today's building codes don't allow us to build properly by keeping interior and exterior skin both or individually.
Thank you. Are there questions?
I have lots of other examples if you want to see things or understand a demo diagram or what a house looks like, but I know I don't have time to show them all.
Okay.
Unless you ask.
Thank you. Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, thank you. What would be your recommended solution?
We believe the definition of demolition needs to be addressed, period. Not necessarily, I think we have to look at it not in terms of skin on a building, whether that's interior or exterior, and we have to understand that project proposals sometimes require us, because of current building code, to affect the structure within that skin, and the only way for us to get to it properly, whether that's from a waterproofing or a structural or an intent that's just to say, hey, I bought this $2 million piece of junk and I'm remodeling it for another $1 million, but you're going to make me keep my whatever it is, rotten old XYZ in order to meet a diagram,
So,
I think is a problem.
Yeah, if I could just interrupt. I understand the issue, and I had a couple of questions myself regarding what happens when you do take off reasonably intact exterior or interior wallboard and find floating studs and whatever else. My question to you was, do you have specific wording that you have proposed or can recommend?
I don't believe that skin or whether we keep the inside of a building from a surface perspective should be considered at all, at any percentage.
Okay.
If we want to look at a building, it should be about its overall, potentially its overall mass, I don't know. I think we'd have to look at that further. I think our concern is that this is a giant, great step, but that definition has not been perfected in terms of what you're seeing here tonight.
Okay, thank you.
I might follow up with another question. If I assume you do work in other municipalities as well, and is this draft getting closer to what other folks are doing, or is this pulling us further away?
I think it's getting closer. I think it's a step in the right direction for sure.
But it's still, how would you characterize the ability to deal with a demolition in Los Gatos as compared to other neighboring communities?
Antiquated and consuming.
Okay, thank you. Okay, David Zikovich.
I'm just here to back up what Bess has said. I have 100 pictures that look just like that. I didn't bother bringing them. A lot of you have already seen them. We are, years gone by, when we ran into a problem like dry rot in a wall and we had nothing but stucco holding it up, we could call the building department, they'd come out and they would say, go ahead and take it off, fix it, make it right. That is not how things are done now. Well, I brought something into the planning department a few months back. We had dry rot from the bottom of a windowsill all the way to the bottom of the floor. There is no contiguity over the top, and they said, come in for a new house permit. Obviously, no one in their right mind would do that, so we abandoned the dry rot in the wall. It's in there still. We're finishing up the house now, and it's rotten and needs to be replaced. So I suppose when we're done with the house, we'll go in for a separate permit to repair it. So above and beyond what's going on with you guys changing the ordinance, how the building department and the planning department are dealing with this are to the strictest terms of what you guys are putting into the codes. So there has to be a little bit more flexibility between what's codified and what is really, really happening out in the real world. You saw the cardboard walls. I can show you pictures of dry rot. We're entombing walls that are completely junk. We have fireplaces that are falling down, but we can't take them down because it will break the contiguity of the building. So you need to put something in there that will allow for these other conditions. Questions?
Vice Chair Hansen.
Like was asked of Ms. Wiersma, do you have suggested language that we should be using instead of this? You mentioned the way it used to be was better. Do you?
The building department and the planning department had a little bit more latitude, or were operated with a little more latitude and a little more common sense. In the past, we've pulled the walls off the inside of a house and we'll lath and plaster building. The stuff's breaking off the walls already because the house has been neglected for 100 years. And we tear all the interior off to find out that there's no moisture barrier on the outside of the house.
Right. I heard the concern. What the question I asked was, do you have a suggestion about how this should be written as versus the way it is proposed?
I don't know what the changes. I don't believe the code's changed any. I believe the way that the building department and planning department are enforcing them are stricter than it once was, and they're following the rules completely and not really applying any common sense.
Okay, I see. Thanks.
Or are not allowed to apply any common sense.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, thank you. Gary Colsat.
Good evening. I will use my time wisely, I hope. Number one, I applaud the the abandonment of this continuity requirement, I think that it makes it almost impossible to conform. There's plenty of examples to prove that. I'm not going to go into that. I wanted to talk about what my bigger concern has been for the last 20, 25 years, is that the definition of demolition is removal of either or both the inside and the exterior of the wall in line with each other, so you can see right through the wall. We're leaving the framing, but we have to leave one of the two surfaces, right? Everybody knows about that rule. Let me give you 4 examples. One, and these are 4 examples that I have in my projects. One, we had a house that was all stucco, and the guy wanted to put shingles on the house. That covered up the stucco. We weren't going to even take the stucco off. We wanted to just add shingles. Technically, that was a demolition. Okay? Number 2, let's say you have a ranch house that's built in the 60s, and typically they did the curbside appeal with siding, and on the other 3 sides, in the back and the sides, they did it in stucco for cost reasons. Well, let's say we do some remodeling in the back. We want to add siding to match the front. Now we have 2 sides without siding. We want to add siding on the sides. Nope, that's a demolition. Not going to work. These are 2 instances where the client was penalized for trying to make the house look better. And where's the demolition involved in that? It's not. So 2 more real quick. A lot of older garages did not have drywall. They had, they just didn't finish off the garage. But many times we're using that space for a family room or whatever, or we're adding on through the garage. And so now we can't take off the outside surface of a garage because there's no inside surface. We're actually telling our clients, to be candid, to drywall your garage before we apply. So now we have a drywall on the inside so we can take the outside off. Pretty ridiculous, right? And then the 4th one is I have a current project where we demolished the outside of the house. The outside skin we left the drywall on. And we did the demolition in December. We covered up the walls. We covered up in plastic. The contractor took great care in doing all this stuff. They pulled the plastic off in April after we had some sun in March, and he's got black mold on the drywall. So I go to the planning department. I ask, what do we do about it? Well, you have to take off the drywall. That means that's a demolition. Now you have to go back in and get it approved.
Thank you. Are there questions? So I had a question,
Okay.
And maybe, I don't know whether it relates to other points you'd like to make, but we've heard now from several folks that there are challenges with this concept of demolition that go beyond what's in the proposed ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question is this something that you believe could be addressed by better definitions of demolition, or that the concept of demolition needs to be abandoned completely?
I would not want to give up the concept of demolition completely. However, I think that the framing should denote as what's there, what the wall is. It should be the framing portion, not the finishes. And a case in point is Saratoga now accepts that. So there's your local example. There's a new planning director that's come in, and they basically have decided that that we don't have to keep the interior or the exterior. They realize they want a better product in the end. They want the houses to have all the waterproofing and the insulation, and they want the building officials to be able to inspect in proper sequence, because if you leave your inside on and take the outside off and then you do wiring, and then it throws off the whole sequence of building inspection. So the building officials, I think, would be in favor of this.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, would that suggestion apply equally to a historic structure as a non-historic?
Yeah, I have sympathy for the historic structures in the Preservation Committee that we do, but I've got plenty of old homes that don't have any water vapor barriers. And I think the lead in the paint is the only thing that keeps the moisture out, and, and there's no more lead in paint. So it's too bad when I've got a client on Glen Ridge that spent $2.5–3 million, and he doesn't have a vapor barrier on the outside of his house because they had to leave his siding. So
there might be...
my thing is with historic structures, have you seen it time and time again, where we can recreate exactly what was there with new material, with matching siding profiles, matching stucco, matching stone. We can do it. Dave Flick did it. Dave Zikovich has done it. If Dave Zikovich can do it, no. I think that we get hung up on something that is old just because it's old. Look, the Steinbeck building caused the Steinbeck house in Montesrino, because the wood was rotten and the city made them Bondo it back. So what are we saving? You could have done a much better job of taking it off, putting sheer on the wall, sheer plywood, you know, put the waterproofing on there, waterproof the windows correctly, put matching siding on there, or matching stone, or matching materials. It's not that difficult anymore. We do it on purpose. You know, on old home, we try to make a home look old and distressed. I mean, we can do it. And it makes us a better product. In today's world, they talk about it, we have build it green, we have green rules, and we have energy compliance, and we have everything else. And I think that we need to take another look at this. I'm not saying that, I mean, if you have an old home, a historic home, I think maybe you replace it in kind, but you get away from the slivers and you have siding that's old and siding that's new, and you can see that seam, and it's, you know, why would we do that when we have the ability? We do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Jennifer Kretschmer.
Hello, good evening. I'm Jennifer Kretschmer, AIA. I am a resident and an architectural business owner here in town. I am also on the AIA Silicon Valley Board of Directors. Although I am not speaking on behalf of the AIA, I'm speaking solely on behalf of myself and other my clients. So in general, I'm wholly in support of removing the contiguity rule. It does help us become more in line with local communities, as well as getting rid of a big issue of the front door, back door, demolished house rule. What that means is if someone wants to change something to the front of the house, maybe put in a new window or a new front door, they want to do something nice to the back, and as soon as they do that, and that's it for the scope of work, through the contiguity rule, that's considered a demolished house. So I'm really glad you're getting rid of that part. My colleagues have said some really good examples, and so I'm not going to bring in any of my examples. What I'm going to bring in is that I did write a letter on and submitted it on Thursday, May 16th, so hopefully you guys received that. I did have an idea for a way of addressing the repair statement, although I don't think it's wholly fleshed out yet. I'd like to propose that that would say in the non-historic section, repair, the removal and replacement of in-kind, non-repairable exterior or interior wall covering, resulting in no change to its exterior appearance or approved design character if approved by the deciding body. Now, there's a few definitions in there I'd like to go over and maybe clarify. By deciding body, I don't think it should just be the planning commission or the planning department. I think we definitely need to have the building department and the building official and the building inspectors be able to chime in so that we do not have any more health and life safety issues, because just like my colleagues, I've had to leave things in walls that I wake up in the middle of the night sweating that this is going to be a health and life safety issue for their family because mold's been left in the walls, creosote and old chimneys have been left in the walls, and those sort of things. In my statement in saying approved design character, I'd like to say that what I meant by that definition is that the planning department has already approved a design. Whenever someone's remodeling their home, they're really trying to make it better than it was before. And so the approved design character would mean that it would stay in conformance with the design character that the planning department had already approved in the set of plans. So therefore, if you have to remove a section of wall, it does go back in kind as the approved design character. And since that's about all I would like to address right now.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you. I thought that the language proposed in your letter is actually very constructive.
Thank
That's for you guys. But I do have a question, given that we're talking about exterior or interior wall covering, and it sounds like it's exterior and or interior, because there may be, how
I think it would be best if we were allowed to have that kind of flexibility. And of course, working with the building department for those life safety issues, and as well working with the planning department, as long as we do not have to go back as a tech demo and go back through planning, hearing, and commission, because of course, that could stop a project for 3 to 6 months, right?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice Chair Hansen.
So I read your letter and thank you for your comments. If we were to change the repair definition to what you suggested, with the understanding behind what you suggested, would that address the deficiencies of this building in drywall into the, or are there more changes that we need to make?
I think it's a really good start. I feel very comfortable with that language, but I do also think that we need to include some language about items that are projecting from a wall, or items that are not contiguous with the wall. For example, the chimneys, bay windows. A lot of those things are not addressed, and we have policies of how we deal with them, but nothing is written down, or nothing is very specific. And so I would also want to see that addressed in this policy, so that it is very clear what are the guidelines.
Okay, so if I'm going to paraphrase what I heard you say, is that that although you and others said you applaud the removal of contiguity, that there are at least a couple of different things that need to be relooked at before this would make it more streamlined and address these impractical issues of encasing mold into walls and.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I had a question on the deciding body. It seems like you're proposing an and or planning department or building department. And are you suggesting that there are criteria where it only goes to building instead of planning? Or are
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
The planning department is most concerned with zoning issues, with locations of setbacks. The building department is concerned with life safety issues. So if it is a criteria that has come up that's a life safety issue, it really should be addressed by the building official. If it is something that could disrupt the approved design character, then certainly it should go back to the planning department.
So that would be something that would be stated on the permit application? Is it a life safety or is it a design? How would that get sorted out in the process?
I'm not a policy writer, but I would love to see that if it could just at least say that the building official has the authority. Because right now, it basically goes to planning. And if planning doesn't like it, or planning can't make it work with the rules the way they're set, it doesn't matter what the building official is. And as some of my colleagues mentioned, when we used to have this in the past with different staff members at the town, the building official did tend to take precedent over life safety issues and did sometimes override the planning department.
So we'll get to questions of staff later, but to come back to that, would it be feasible to say that it goes to the planning department, and then if there is a life safety issue, it also goes to building department?
I'm not sure. You guys need to hash that out.
Okay. So that's part of the I think it has to be clear
It has
in
to
your
be.
opinion.
It should be clear, though,
Correct?
who's the
Okay.
deciding body.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So that's all the cards that I have, and we would now close the public portion of the hearing and ask if commissioners have questions of staff or wish to comment on this proposal. Commissioner Janoff.
Would it be possible to make the sort of changes recommended by the architects in general, changing the authority for approving the repair without it triggering a technical demo? Would it be possible to include that in these in this ordinance, or does that happen someplace else?
Absolutely. Staff would, based on that concern and that question, staff would recommend that rather than saying the deciding body, that it could be changed to the community development director, who is the head of both the planning and building divisions. And so that decision would be made in consultation both with planning and with the building official.
So if I could follow up, that in effect, would that in effect provide sort of a check and balance as to whether it is a technical demo or it's a repair situation or health and safety situation?
Correct. At this point, for non-historic homes, there is no way to address this type of situation. And so the proposed revision is allowing that flexibility that has been requested here this evening.
Great, thank you.
So you said that it could be accomplished that way. It does seem as though we've added some complexity to this process. Is that correct?
There are two parts to what's proposed, right? The removal of the contiguity, which I think we've heard reduces the complexity of the process, and then codifying an opportunity to address these situations where there is some repair needed, to allow some flexibility and judgment by staff.
But I was specifically asking about that second part where there is repair needed and that decision goes to the community development director. Is that making the process more complex and more
No.
take more time?
No. No, it would be an internal staff discussion.
Okay. What about the idea of requiring the application to state whether there is a life safety issue involved?
When somebody comes in stating that this type of repair is needed, we would be asking them to provide an explanation of the situation. And that those details would be considered. As I said, if the decision is going to the community development director, he would have consultation both from building and planning.
And through the chair, I would just say that's not something we would add to an application. We would just take those facts in and then make a determination.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Vice Chair Hansen.
This last issue that was mentioned by Ms. Kretschmer about the items projecting from the wall, such as that would interrupt the contiguity. What could we do about that?
So the question of chimneys in particular was actually discussed as it was part of the discussion with the policy committee, and that actually does not require a change in the code. But would just be a change to the details in the demolition affidavit to include chimneys along with the doors and windows that are currently exempt from being part of the existing wall area. And so that's something that can be done without requiring code change.
So, and that's not something we're considering tonight. We're only looking at the code, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. There was a question that was raised about in one of the in some of the testimony about perhaps using framing rather than surface or exterior to define demo. Does staff have an opinion about
about using framing rather than exterior surface?
That discussion isn't part of what was proposed by the policy committee. The recommendations were pretty specific to these two items, to try and really move this forward quickly, to try and simplify the process. So a larger discussion, if the town council wishes to direct that, it could be a follow-up.
And then through the chair, that also could be part of your recommendation. If you believe that if someone just leaves the framing, then that should be okay for either historic and or non-historic. That definitely can be part of any recommendation to the council.
Well, I guess I would be on with that. I understand we could make that change, but before I would support something like that, I'd really be interested in staff's opinion on something making that kind of a change, as to whether that would result in, you know, abuses. It sounds like it's something that's being accepted in Saratoga, but I beyond that evidence, I have very little data to try to make a decision on that particular point.
And neither does staff. You know, ultimately, I would imagine, and I can't speak for the majority of the council, but if that was included in the recommendation, I envision that there might be a sending it back to the policy committee to have that discussion, and then subsequently sending it to HPC if it impacts the exterior coverings of historic buildings, and then we'd be back here before you with all of that information and start the loop over again.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay. All right, discussion. How do folks feel about this? Commissioner Janoff.
I'm really sympathetic to the public testimony, having gone through the nuances of Santa Cruz County's regulations in terms of demolition. And so I'm very much in favor of the changes that have been initiated already, and I'm also in favor of augmenting the changes with the following. I think that the definition of repair that Ms. Kretschmer offered is a very constructive one, but I would also include exterior and or interior walls, so that allows you to take off both surfaces if you do need to make a repair. And I can't think of why the definition for repair would be different in historic and non-historic, so my thinking is that it would be the same. And I also am strongly in favor of letting the building official determine whether or not you've got a repair that needs to be made, you know, whether it's health and safety or you just simply, I appreciated how Ms. Wiersma said that how houses are built today, or required to be built today, versus how they've been built in the past, and having to touch old and new and try to make that work can be very challenging. So I think we need to be sensitive to that, and letting the building inspector or the building official make a determination to help the process move along in a way that allows the integrity of the structure to be maintained at the high, or recreated at the highest level, and absolutely avoiding situations where we're just working around existing mold or an unsafe construction. That makes absolutely no sense to me. So I think those changes do make a real positive, go in a positive direction. And I think also looking at what Saratoga has done to modify their ordinance would be very constructive. So I would recommend that this go back with those changes and looking at what Saratoga has done. See if we can learn from that.
A question for staff as a follow-up to that, which generally makes sense to me. Is there the need for language about historic properties to talk about matching or in-kind materials?
So changes to the repair section for historic structures is not part of what's being discussed tonight. What's in front of you is the addition of this repair section to the non-historic structures, as well as the removal of the contiguity from both the historic and non-historic. So that would be opening up a different part of the definition.
Okay. The reason I asked, I think Commissioner Janoff mentioned historic as well, so.
Yeah, and I think as the chair is aware, in historic, the HPC has the ability now to review the condition of the exterior siding and make a determination that it needs to be replaced in kind, and so that would stay the same. They have that ability.
Okay, so that would not be needed, in your opinion, to include historic in the scope of this change? Okay.
Right.
Commissioner Janoff?
If historic isn't included in the scope of changes that we're talking about, do you, in staff's opinion, will the problems that the architects have described, having to button up for construction and other problems, will that be solved by the latitude HPC has or not?
Well, a couple things. Maybe I should clarify, of course, the contiguity would change with the historic, and that's what the HPC looked at and discussed as well. You're talking about the issues with the framing itself, the dry rot of the framing itself, which I believe the HPC can look at that.
And I would just add, current process for historic house, you find dry rot or something that's irreparable that you think needs to be replaced in kind, you can go to HPC. Depending on what it is, you sometimes don't even have to go to HPC. You come to community development. We talk to the building official. He makes a determination. All we're doing in the addition of the repair to the non-historic is allowing that opportunity for non-historic buildings. So that doesn't really change. We already have that process, and that's the process we use for historic currently. Sometimes they do have to go to HPC. It just depends on the circumstance. But this is offering that same opportunity as a workaround for those types of situations when they come up.
And I would add that for non-historic homes, of course, we're not going to HPC, so it's actually an even simpler process.
Okay, other questions? Are we closing in on a motion? Commissioner Badami?
Oh, I'm just going to comment that I'd like to see Commissioner Janoff go ahead with a motion. I think she'd get our support.
Okay, so I move that the Town Code Amendment application A19-003 be forwarded to Town Council. I can make the required findings for SEQA, and I can make the required findings for the general plan, specifically to Chapter 29 of Town Code regarding demolition, and that with that recommendation that it go to council, the changes that I previously summarized are noted or incorporated, however that process happens.
Commissioner Badami?
Second.
Okay. With regard to the question for the maker of the motion, with regard to the decision process, it's been suggested by staff that a way to involve the building department in the decision was to have the decision, the deciding body be the Director of Community Development. Is that what you intended when you, or is that what you'd like to include when you did
yes.
it? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The second?
So moved.
Okay.
So accepted.
Okay. Sounds good. I will make one more comment and then I'll call the question. I will be supporting the motion, and I wanted to thank very much the professionals who've submitted information and showed up for the hearing and provided in a somewhat constrained setting the ability for us to take input and to have some dialogue. And I think it's one of the things that makes the town great. And I really appreciate the involvement. It would be very difficult for us to come up with something good without the involvement of the professionals who really know the issues that we're facing. So thank you for that. And I will call the question. All in favor?
Aye, okay. Opposed? Passes unanimously. And this one, I believe, is no appeal because it's a recommendation, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. So our last item on the agenda is the report from, is other business, and the next one is report from Director of Community Development. Mr. Paulson, do you have a report?
Thank you, Chair Hudis. Just briefly, since the Planning Commission council met last night. The big item last night was the budget, which they discussed and ultimately approved with some modifications for some excess funds that they were able to allocate to different opportunities moving forward. We will be having a general plan advisory committee meeting tomorrow night. So look forward to sitting in the chambers for a third night in a row. So that'll be exciting for me. And so we will be continuing the discussion of kind of confirming the draft vision that was decided on at the last GPAC meeting, and then we will be jumping into guiding principles, which is kind of the next level below the vision to help inform the development of goals and policies as we move forward through that process.
Great, thank you. And we also have commissioners serve on other committees. Are there any reports from other subcommittees? Okay. There was a historic preservation committee. Unfortunately, I missed it, and Commissioner O'Donnell's not here tonight. So we'll catch up on that at the next meeting. Any other matters that Commissioner would care to discuss? Okay, thank you. This meeting is adjourned.